Chapter 556. P.S. Check your pockets to see if there are any votes left. If you don't vote now, you won't get double votes after the event. Sloth is doing his best. I need monthly votes to finish this story today. Also, friends on other platforms and pirated versions. Can't you support Sloth on the next Shidian app during the Double Festival? The data is a bit awkward. I need everyone's support. Yin Sheng went to participate in the discussion of their so-called important matters. How to persuade the begonia flower owner to bloom again. Lu Xiaoyi continued his journey of finding beautiful women. He left the matter of flowers and plants to the women. Of course, the plants in the cultivation world were different from those in the mortal world. It was possible for them to develop intelligence, absorb sunlight and moonlight, and cultivate into spirits. For example, in this mountain and swamp, after thousands of years of nourishment, it was normal for one or two plants to become spirits. It was nothing new in the cultivation world. Plants becoming spirits was very complicated and couldn't be generalized. It was as simple as beasts. It was just a change in form, developing a hyoid bone, and speaking human language. Plants needed to go through the evolution of species before they could transform into humans and mingle in the mortal world. Beasts develop intelligence and cultivated by eating qi. Most of them could transform into humans and learn human language when they built their foundation. Of course, it had a deep relationship with the bloodline of the species. Pigs, cows, and sheep were slower and their transformation was not complete. They might need to form their essence before people could see their true roots. However, peacocks were not so difficult. After all, they were from the quasi-sages and were born with the advantage of bloodline. It was much more difficult for plants to become spirits. When they ate qi, they began to swallow qi and were almost no different from ordinary grass. When they built their foundation, they had preliminary intelligence, but they still couldn't transform into humans. This was only possible when they reached the Jindan realm. It was not absolute. Most of the plant spirits of Jindan could only cultivate silently in the same place. All of this would change completely after they formed their nascent souls. There was no other reason. Beasts could transform into flesh, blood, bones, skin, and internal organs. It was just a change in form. However, plants had to go through the process of transforming into living creatures. It was very difficult. It would take a long time to refine. Either it would appear in a remote place deep in the mountains and forests, where it would not be disturbed, or it would be carefully taken care of in a human's back garden. Other than that, it would be difficult to survive. It would be very easy for it to be plucked and refined into elixirs before it was fully formed. Based on the classification of monsters, plant fairies were definitely inferior to beasts in terms of combat prowess. This was because plant fairies did not have any combat experience during their growth. The limited combat experience they had was nothing more than the occasional beast that accidentally entangled and suffocated them. This was basically meaningless in a real battle. Of course, plants were also divided into species. Ordinary species like the begonia banana could only grow step by step, but some natural variants were different, such as the gourd brothers of the Spirit Gourd Cave. The mount of a Jindan cultivator would definitely be at the level of a Jindan. At this level of combat experience, it could not be said that it was not rich. To be able to be chosen as the mount of a cultivator, its aptitude would definitely not be mediocre. Therefore, when facing the most ordinary plant fairies, it was very normal for it to have an advantage. Fortunately, this was the place where the cultivators were holding a meeting. If there were no humans watching over it, it was afraid that even its roots would be dug out and eaten. One of the main characteristics of plant fairies was that they were the best nourishment. Everything could be eaten, unlike demonic beasts, which had many parts that could not be eaten. One could not blame the demonic beasts for being cruel. In this aspect, humans were the cruel ancestors. Thinking about it, this begonia flower lord also had a bad temper. When it was wronged, it simply influenced all the begonia bananas in the mountain swamp to shut themselves up to express its dissatisfaction. Yin Chang and the others went to discuss countermeasures, wanting this meeting to be more successful. In fact, it was unnecessary. Plant fairies were all ghouls and would not listen to advice. Unless that troublemaker Jean Dan's mount was beheaded. How could that be possible? If you want to beat a dog, you have to look at its master. He did not deliberately look for the begonia flower lord. There was no need to add to this mess. He just moved with the crowd, like a little tramp on a public bus. It was hard to explain his mentality. It was probably because after being lonely for a long time, he wanted to be close to the crowd and comfort his heart that was gradually becoming cold and hard. Everyone had their own way of resolving the negative energy. After a long time of cultivation, this kind of state of mind would silently affect the cultivator. Under the circumstances where the cultivator was unaware of it, if the cultivator ignored it, it was the best time for the demons to invade the heart. He did not know how others did it, but he had his own way. For example, right now he was tailing blending in. He listened to everything. Even if it was a household talk, oil, salt, and vinegar, he did not feel bored. In fact, it was a kind of relaxation, even if this kind of relaxation was a bit wretched. Why not? If he had to get close to the crowd, why not get close to the beautiful girls? Could it be that he had to find a place where demonic beasts gathered and looked fierce? The smell of cosmetics was better than the smell of blood. In 10 days, the thousands of cultivators who participated in the convention knew about this person. Straw Hat, Jean Dan. He seemed to be the cultivator escort of Xianyuan. He liked to follow behind the crowd and eat farts. No matter what they talked about, he would have the nerve to stick his ear out. Even if it was some private matters of the cultivators, there would occasionally be bold and straightforward female cultivators who would criticize him with a few words. He was not angry and would leave with a smile. He was also a strange person. Yin Chung could not do anything to him, but he could not just chase him away like this, right? He did not do anything bad. He was just a little wretched. Tomorrow is the last day. There will be a few famous life elemental Jean Dan from the Dharma lineage preaching. It will be the end of the convention. Lu Xiaoyi was still a bit unsatisfied. It's over already? Isn't it too rushed? The problem of the begonia flower lord has not been solved, right? We can't leave any regrets. Yin Chung was speechless. It's so hard for you to still think about the begonia flower lord. There's no other way. We've used all the methods we could. Even the owner of Splendid Garden could not make it change its mind. You know how stubborn the spirits of plants are. They really have a one-track mind. Lu Xiaoyi asked casually, "Who is the owner of the mount? Is it difficult to apologize and make up for it? Is face so important? Let the thousands of people here be disappointed?" Yin Chung thought about it and decided to tell him the truth. He did not say it before because he was afraid that this guy would go out and cause trouble. This person was too ruthless and could not be stopped. She is a special guest of Splendid Garden, an important guest, Nishang Fairy. She comes from the top cultivation clan of the 3 Pure Ones. There are countless perfected cultivators and perfected cultivators in the clan. I heard that there are also half-immortals. In terms of clans, she is one of the top 3 clans in the 5 rings. Originally, even if she came to the Western regions with such a background, she would still have to abide by the rules of the Western regions. She is not allowed to be presumptuous, but there are some obstacles that cannot be explained clearly. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. What obstacles? Her thigh is thick and her background is strong. Yin Chung sighed. She had always been straightforward, but in this world, not everything could go according to her wishes. There were always times when she was constrained. On the day of the accident, there was actually no one present. Her Jiushi went out to play by itself. I don't know how it got into a conflict, but they both said different things. The begonia flower lord said that the Jiushi attacked first, while the Jiushi said that the begonia flower lord had the intention to murder. How can you explain clearly? Little E, the Kuan cultivator assembly of the 5 rings, is the most taboo of indiscriminate bloodshed, whether it's in or outside the 5 rings. This is the core value of our assembly. You can't follow your own habits. This is why I did not tell you. Even if the 3 Pure Ones Nishang Fairy is at fault, there are rules of the Kuan cultivator assembly to restrict it. I do not allow you to use weapons and kill without permission. The world of Kuan cultivators is different from the normal cultivation world. Chapter 557. Lu Xiaoyi was very innocent. Why would I use weapons? It has nothing to do with me. Senior sister, I'm the most reasonable person and I love peace the most. You know that I hide when I'm in trouble. What a kind person. Gong Xiaodai led the way in front. This is the last Dharma assembly. We won't touch on the Kuan Dao, but only on the wonderful Dharma. Everyone will go to the Crabapple Flower King to talk about the Tao heart and reason. We will also give the Flower King an explanation. If we can make it change its mind and let the crab apples bloom at the end of the Dharma assembly, there will be no regrets. Lu Xiaoyi followed behind. Just like when he first came to Xianyuan, he was in the position of a follower. This was his habit, especially when he was traveling with beauties. He liked to follow behind people and feast his eyes. The two in front had long been used to this guy's bad taste and could only let him do as he pleased. However, he had an opinion. Isn't it inappropriate for everyone to wipe a person's, but when she does something wrong? Her mount doesn't represent beasts, and she doesn't represent humans either. She's used to such a bad habit. Gong Xiaodai covered her mouth and laughed. Little E, what you mean is that you can wipe a person's, but by yourself. You can wipe it more carefully. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior sister Xiaodai knows me best. I'm a professional at wiping a person's, but who would know? Gong Xiaodai found it difficult. When one of the two people was not serious, she could still cover it up. If two of the three people were not serious, it would be a disaster. She could only try her best to lead the conversation back to the right track. Of course, it doesn't make sense for everyone to apologize for one person's mistake. However, the principle of the Kuan Dao assembly is to never isolate a sister. Therefore, the sisters thought of a flexible method. Everyone will hold a Dharma assembly next to the Crabapple Flower King and discuss the origin of life that plant spirits care about. This is a disguised way to compensate it and see if it has any effect. It will also make people like you, who don't agree with the collective apology, have nothing to say. Lu Xiaoyi indeed had nothing to say. The Kuan cultivators were meticulous and could always find a way that both sides could accept. However, she was still disdainful. It's such a simple thing. Why do you have to make it so complicated? This was the last day, and it was also the climax that the assembly had deliberately created. The discussion of the Tao regarding the origin of life was in line with the cultivation direction of the majority of Kuan cultivators, because it involved aging, substituting, and maintaining youth. This was a hurdle that almost every female cultivator could not avoid. Therefore, although it was also to appease the Crabapple Flower King, there was no trace of any falsehood in his actions. It was very appropriate. Lu Xiaoyi finally saw the Begonia Flower King. The huge flower vines, stems, and corollas had hundreds of flower bundles, each of which was nearly 10 feet tall. When it was in full bloom, it was unknown how beautiful it was, but now it was tightly closed, as if it had nothing to do with the beauty of the mountains and rivers. Because of the humiliation of the Begonia Flower King, all the flowers in the mountain river swamp lost their former colors, becoming the failure of the Western region's Kuan Dao Conference. Originally, he had no interest in this matter, but after seeing the Crabapple Flower Queen, he had a different feeling. Although the Crabapple Flower King covered it up very carefully, Lu Xiaoyi had a deeper understanding of some special forms of luck, since the interception cluster on the Hasa star had merged with the natural luck and changed its color. He could feel that this Crabapple Flower King had luck, and because of this, it was able to stand out among the many crabapple banana trees and become the only Jean Dan level crabapple tree in the mountain river swamp. Plant spirits were best at hiding. They were not like beasts that could move freely, avoid risks, and pursue benefits. Therefore, they had their own unique secrets when it came to hiding their aura. This was the main reason why it could survive until now. It had evaded the perception of countless human cultivators, but its secret could not be hidden from Lu Xiaoyi. Before going to Hasa Star, he could not discover it, but now he was different, since he had discovered it. Then he had some guesses about the Mount of Nishong Fairy. In his more than 200 years of cultivation, the first people he came into contact with were human beings with luck, and he did not find any other races. This might also be the reason why his perception was limited. On the Hasa Star, he learned that luck could also fall on the spiritual opportunity that had been sealed in the depths of the Earth's core for hundreds of thousands of years. This broadened his vision and made him no longer limited. Now, since he found that the crabapple flower king could also be favored by luck, why couldn't it fall on a demon beast? He was a little interested. It was not that he wanted to steal the luck of these plants and beasts, but he wanted to figure out what kind of role the fragments of luck played in the growth of all creatures. He knew very well that it was impossible for him to collect all the fragments. At that time, when the great way of destiny collapsed, the fragments flew to countless universes. Even if he became a nascent soul or a monarch in his life, he would not be able to go to so many places, let alone steal them. And he might not be able to do it. He just wanted to understand the rules and the forces behind the incident of the Hasa star. The crowd surged, and with the crabapple flower king as the center, they formed a big circle. The preacher preached next to the crabapple flower king, treating it as a master. The cultivators of the Jinshio garden still attached great importance to this crabapple flower king. This was a strange object in their sphere of influence. It was the plant spirit of the highest realm in the mountains and rivers. It represented a certain significance, so they had been protecting it for thousands of years in case someone secretly came to dig it up and refine it into elixirs. If it was someone else, if someone destroyed the strange object in their garden, they would be the first to punish them. But it was different now. This was the venue of the Koan Dao conference. As the masters, they had to protect the purpose of the conference to the greatest extent. Moreover, when the Jiushi and the Flower King were fighting, its master did not participate. Instead, she was talking to other people. In the end, this was just a dispute between plants and animals. It was too much to involve the orthodoxy of human beings. The cultivators took their seats according to their sections. Of course, the seats of the big sects were always better. Those who were in the front row were the few big forces in the western region: Xianyuan, Jialan, Lingor Cave, Wanjing sect, and the master of the Jinshio garden. Among them, there were also many Qian cultivators, which was unavoidable. However, there were no male foundation establishment cultivators who actually participated. Many of them were led by Jindan. Their sects were small and limited, so they could not find Jindan cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi was mixed in with the other cultivators. There was nothing strange about his gender. What was strange was his attire. However, since he was from Xianyuan, not many people had any doubts about it. Yin Chun said, "There are 3 speakers. Master Zonghua Taoist from the Jinshio garden, Taoist Mingxiu from Jialan, and Nishang Fairy from the 3 Pure Ones. Listen carefully and don't make trouble." The distribution was very fair. The master of the Jinshio garden had to have a place. This had nothing to do with the level of Taoism. Jialan was the most powerful sect in the western region, so was duty-bound. As for Nishang Fairy, she was the master of the event, so of course she could not hide. Moreover, the 3 Pure Ones' Taoism was outstanding in the 5th ring, so no one doubted it. In this kind of occasion, as usual, Xianyuan had nothing to do. This was a problem left behind by history. Swordsmen also knew their own limitations, but he was still dissatisfied as usual. "I think you should go up, senior sister. Talk to them about the opposite of life." Chapter 558. The lecture soon began. To Lu Xiaoyi's relief, the earth cultivators didn't have the bad habit of beating around the bush and went straight to the point. Taoist Zonghua was the first to go on stage to teach. He talked about how the weak could overcome the strong. People are weak when they are born, but they are strong when they die. Plants are weak when they are born, but they wither when they die. Therefore, those who are strong will die, and those who are weak will live. The strong soldiers are destroyed, and the strong trees are broken. The strong are at the bottom, and the weak are at the top. The foundation-building cultivators below were mesmerized by his words, but in Lu Xiaoyi's ears, they were empty. Big but speechless, high but invisible, Taoist Zonglan Mingxiu focused more on the temperament. If you don't see, you're clear. If you don't know, you're exposed. If you don't fight, you're meritorious. If you don't boast, you're strong. If you don't fight, you're unrivaled in the world. I have 3 treasures, and I protect them. The first is kindness, the second is frugality, and the third is not daring to be first in the world. Live in a good place, have a good heart, be benevolent, speak well, govern well, do well, and act well at the right time. If you don't fight, you're unrivaled. The state of mind was a very elusive thing for cultivators, and it was rarely mentioned in ordinary sections. It was about self-understanding. Taoist Zhonglan Mingxiu's words might be in line with the meaning of Tao, but to the swordsman, it was completely inappropriate. After talking for so long, where was the difference? Fortunately, these cheap words were not for the swordsman, but for the Haidang flower master. The last one to go up was Nishang Fairy. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi saw her. In one word, she was very fairy-like. Why was she fairy-like? In one word, she was light. Of course, you could also understand it as thin, but the thinness of a fairy and the thinness of a mortal who didn't have enough to eat were two different concepts. It wasn't that her eyes were sunken and her cheeks were fleshless, but an indescribable feeling of floating, as if a gust of wind could blow her up to the celestial court. His appearance was ethereal, and his voice was ethereal as well. When his words came out of his mouth, his voice descended from the heavens, as if it was a celestial voice. This was also a major characteristic of the three Pure Ones cultivators when they preached. They were good at creating environments and using astronomical phenomena to increase their persuasiveness. All things under the heavens are of the same nature. Since nature is good, it gives birth to all things. The nature of the earth is good, nourishing all living things, without exception. Saints know the world of music theory and practice the world, so all things are greatly benefited by their merit. Immortal Jinren helps the heavens and the earth, but he doesn't dare to take it lightly. He respects it, values it, accepts it, and protects it. Nishang Fairy had been talking all the way, and she had her own style. The three Pure Ones cultivators also had another characteristic, which was that they were good at interaction. He would often randomly ask the people who were listening to him to ask and answer. Then, based on the people's answers, he would introduce a deeper level of promotion, making the listeners feel a strong sense of participation. The people he chose were not restricted to one category. There were Foundation Establishment disciples, Jindan fellow cultivators, female cultivators, and strongmen. Tao was divided into yin and yang, and it was originally impossible to separate it. How could he be afraid of yin and afraid of yang? His eloquence was really good. Coupled with the cadence of his intonation and the depth of his Tao, he often had a glimmer of hope when he was at a dead end. When he ran out of words, he suddenly had a different peak, which made people addicted. Lu Xiaoyi had experienced the mouth of the three Pure Ones cultivators before. On the Hasa Star, there was the gentle, humorous, sincere, and polite Taoist Bai Ti. Behind his admirable demeanor, he just wanted to drag him to hell with him. Of course, Bai Ti was like this, but the fairy was not necessarily like this. Even if it was the tradition of the three Pure Ones, there must be outstanding and independent people among them. He would not prejudge who was a bad person in advance. There was no good or bad in the cultivation world. In the Tao of life, avoid greed and completeness. Perseverance is the nirvana realm. Among the 3,000 weak waters, only one ladle is taken. Among the 10,000 beautiful flowers, only one branch is taken. Fellow cultivator, let me ask you, why only one ladle is taken? Lu Xiaoyi suddenly felt that he was the center of attention. Oh no, it was the center of attention. The fairy Nishang was pointing at him. In theory, it was normal for the speaker to point at anyone, especially those who were in the front row. However, thousands of cultivators listened to the Tao, and there was a very small probability of being pointed at. If you said that it was completely unintentional, you would be deceiving yourself and others. In particular, the Jindan cultivators were not pointed at casually. If it was Yuanying who was preaching, pointing at them casually was called supporting. If it was Jindan who was at the same level as Jindan cultivators, there was something inexplicable in it. Considering that the speaker was the three Pure Ones, and the one listening was Xian Yuan, there was a deep meaning in it. Everyone knew that Xian Yuan was good at swordsmanship and fighting, but his knowledge of Tao theory was very limited. He was agile in action, but clumsy in speech. Only Jean Dan, a cultivator from Shanshui Lake, could roughly guess Nishang Fairy's intentions. Since the conflict between Jiushi and Haitang Flower Master, a group of cultivators led by Yin Chong and Gong Xiaodai insisted that they should apologize to the Flower Master. This was in line with the Kuan Dao Conference's purpose of equality and education. It was their insistence that made the cultivators around Nishang Fairy have no choice but to agree to the last speech for Haitang Flower Master. Factional undercurrents existed everywhere. Even the cultivators who were detached from worldly affairs were no exception. It was just that their circle was more gentle and not as direct and bloody as the outside world. Nishang Fairy, who originally didn't want to preach at the conference, had the idea of disgusting Xin Yuan. She wasn't tired of preaching, but she hated being forced to do so. In her opinion, it wasn't her fault. It was just a dispute between the two of them, and it didn't cause irreparable results. Why did it have to be like this? There were deaths and injuries and fights between human cultivators, but they weren't so fragile and spoiled. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know this. Yin Chong was afraid that he would cause trouble, so she didn't mention it to him. Although he didn't know the truth, it didn't mean that he didn't understand the contempt in Nishang Fairy's words. This was the simplest and most basic principle of Taoism. Everyone knew it, and there was no other answer. Not to mention the Jindan stage. Even the qi-eating cultivators who had just entered the path of Taoism, and even the mortals who had read some books could understand it. She didn't want to cause trouble for him, but he still wanted to flirt with her. Lu Xiaoyi didn't fall for her tricks. Only taking a ladle of drink, probably because you don't have a wooden bucket. Yin Chong and Gong Xiaodai smiled. This person was good at fighting, but he couldn't learn Taoism. However, bickering and pestering were his natural skills. Only taking a ladle of drink, probably because you only have a wooden ladle. A man only marries one wife, and the only reason is that he doesn't have the money to marry a second one. A woman longs for eternal youth. She wants to be 20 this year and 18 the next year. Where's the end of her desire? However, she is forced by the environment, limited by her strength, and hindered by her opportunities. The three pure ones have a lot of business, and their disciples have countless buckets and jars. However, they teach others to use a wooden ladle. This is too much. Lu Xiaoyi was talking nonsense here, but he didn't show any pity for the Hickory Staff Fairy's cold face. This was also why Xiaodai of the Misty Cloud Palace was most satisfied with him. He didn't show any emotion, but when he turned hostile, he would bite whoever he caught. He didn't care about whether they were fairies or not. Chapter 559. In most spiritual gatherings, the most exciting thing would be the confrontation between two cultivators. This was especially true for sects that were evenly matched. Either sparks of thought would fly, or blood would splatter from their bodies. It was very exciting. Nishang Fairy was prepared for this, but she was not affected by his pestering. She hated sword cultivator Xuanyuan's righteous conduct, which made her a little uncomfortable on this leisure trip. She didn't come for the Kuan Dao convention in the western region. She just happened to be there at the right time and rushed to this point. The Jiushi was a bit abnormal, but she didn't have time to ask. This beast had been with her for hundreds of years. She had raised it since it was a child, so she knew its temper like the back of her hand. Although it looked ferocious, its temper was actually not that bad. There must be a special reason that she didn't know. Otherwise, the Jiushi had never been abnormal, unless it had hurt someone in a battle. Therefore, she insisted that this dispute was the fault of the Haitang flower owner, not her beast. People liked the beauty of flowers and hated the ugliness of ferocious beasts, but they didn't know that beauty and ugliness meant nothing. At least she knew that many plant spirits dressed themselves up like little white flowers, but in fact, there were a lot of them that ate people's flesh and blood. For any creature, once they started to practice, how could they be kind? If they were kind, they wouldn't have lived until now. Pestering endlessly, I use Taoism to explain and let bygones be bygones. In your eyes, I am fishing for fame. Is this unnecessary? Xin Yuan prioritizes fighting everywhere. He doesn't pity the weak and doesn't hold tolerance. Does this mean that he has a different opinion about the Haidang flower? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I am just stating facts. In fact, it is useless for you to say so much. You just want to persuade others to be tolerant. Others bear with it, but you don't take responsibility. You let the emperor do as he pleases, and you still have a high position in righteousness. Is this the way of the three pure ones? Nishang Fairy changed the topic. Right and wrong are in people's hearts, and Taoism always exists. I won't argue with you. Since Xian Yuan is famous in the Five Rings for his agility, why don't we make a small bet? Let's bet on the blooming of the Haitang flower. Whoever makes it bloom wins. Do you dare? This was the true meaning of Nishang Fairy. Defeating a Xian Yuan swordsman in a Dao debate was meaningless. In the past tens of thousands of years, the Xian Yuan people had never won more than a few debates against the law lineage. This kind of weakling only made people feel that they had an unfair advantage. If he wanted to humiliate Xian Yuan, he had to start with his actions. He had to start with Xuan Yuan swordsman's most prided skill, nimble yushing. Of course, it was not a fight. It was a matter of fact. It was on this crabapple flower. Why didn't she look for Yin Cheng and Gong Xiaodai? Of the two female swordsmen, one was bold and careful, while the other was beautiful and intelligent. Neither of them would fall for her trick. This was what she felt after interacting with them for dozens of days at the conference. Originally, she had already given up on the idea of making Xian Yuan lose face at the conference, but who would have thought that Xian Yuan would actually send a Jin Dan Qian Xiu? Who didn't know that Xian Yuan people were bellicose and couldn't stand provocation? The female cultivator was careful and restrained herself at the Kuindao conference. However, since such a reckless guy had broken in, wasn't he the best target for her to provoke? She wasn't afraid of the consequences. It wasn't a martial arts competition, and it didn't involve life and death. Under the watchful eyes of the public, it was just a matter of losing face. This had long become a habit in the tens of thousands of years of tit-for-tat confrontation between the two sides. Now it seemed that this swordsman really had a rash temper. With a little provocation, he immediately fell for the trap. Now that she had made a bet, whether he accepted or not, he would lose face. How could it be good? If he didn't accept, it would weaken his momentum. The dignified Xian Yuan swordsman didn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. If he accepted, with the swordsman's ability, it would be easy for them to destroy the crabapple flower master. However, it would be impossible for them to persuade the crabapple flower to bloom. Yin Cheng and Gong Xiaodai immediately reacted. This woman from the three pure ones was too vicious. At first, the two of them didn't think too much about it. In the end, she forced that idiot little E into a dilemma with just one sentence. The key was that they didn't have any other good way to deal with it. However, Lu Xiaoyi didn't seem to realize it. It was as if he didn't realize his awkward situation at all. A bet? I, Xian Yuan, have never shown weakness to anyone. Why would I be afraid of you? However, now that we have a bet, how do we calculate the stakes? How about if the fairy loses, she has to be my mistress? And if I lose, I have to be the fairy's gigolo? Seeing that he couldn't hear the sinister intentions of the scorpion fairy, he was still arguing about some minor details and taking advantage of her words. He was too childish. However, no matter how much Yin Cheng and Gong Xiaodai reminded him with their divine senses, this guy was stubborn and stubborn. Beside them, buried flower Taoist interrupted. She was the master here, and it was a headache for her to see two rivals making trouble in her own territory. She couldn't tell who was the one who was the victim. Yin Cheng and Gong Xiaodai had taken the lead to find out the whole story first, and the Nikkang spiritual assembly had counterattacked after. One was the overlord of the western region, and the other was the pillar of the Dharma branch. It was difficult to determine who the splendid embroidery should help, but there was one thing she couldn't do. This was her principle. How about this? Everyone here is a guest, and we are all here for the meaning of the Great Way. Why don't the splendid embroidery pay the stakes? Although this crabapple banana isn't a special species, it's still very rare after 1,000 years of cultivation. It'll be good to transplant it into the herb garden. How about this? If either of you can persuade the crabapple flower master to bloom, I'll give him or her the crabapple flower master. It'll be a good story. Nishang Fairy knew that her master was secretly helping her, so she said, "You're right. Since I'm the one who proposed the bet, why don't you try it first?" Lu Xiaoyi hesitated. "You're very confident." "Don't tell me," Nick Hang sneered. "That's my business. You should worry about yourself first." Lu Xiaoyi made his decision. "Okay, I'll bet. But since it's a conflict between the Crabapple Flower Master and the Geolion, I hope you can give me your Geolion for the time being. I'll be able to mediate between them." Nick Hang Fairy was very generous. Why not? With a flip of his hand, a ferocious and ugly Geolion appeared from the spirit beast pouch. Its body was huge and several dozen feet long. It looked majestic and murderous, but as long as a cultivator looked carefully, they would be able to see a trace of panic in its eyes. Lu Xiaoyi didn't avoid it. He reached out and grabbed the Geolion's mane, which wanted to hide but didn't dare to. He pulled it toward the Crabapple Flower Master. There were many types of demonic beasts. There were wild ones, domesticated ones, fighting ones, subsidized ones, flying ones, and pets. There were countless of them. Among them, the most ferocious ones were the wild fighting demonic beasts, and so on. For example, the Geolion was raised by the family since it was young and was used as a flying mount. Its combat ability was limited and it might only be slightly stronger than a pet beast. Therefore, the so-called Jindan stage cultivation was just to scare people. In the cultivation world, it was a principle that almost all demonic beasts in the same realm were weaker than humans, except for a few ancient sacred beasts at the top of the food chain. This was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi dared to carelessly stroke the Geolion's whiskers. Chapter 560. Thousands of pairs of eyes stared at him, not knowing how the situation would develop. If it was a battle, no one would think that the swordsman would lose. However, if it was to make the crabapple flower bloom, no one would think that he would win. This was because in the past 10 days, countless cultivators had already used up all their methods. They were not good at killing people, but when it came to such unorthodox ways, to flowers and plants, they believed that no one could compare with them. There was only one conclusion, that the swordsman's brain was flooded with water. Lu Xiaoyi did not care about what others thought. He was very grateful that he was able to pretend to be second-rate before leaving the fifth ring. He was grateful that the 3 pure ones had given him such a rare opportunity. Under normal circumstances, it would not be easy to catch the 3 pure ones in public. He led the unwilling Jiushi to the side of the Crabapple Flower Lord. He did not care about the Crabapple Flower Lord who was ignoring him. He grabbed the Jiushi's front paw with one hand and the thickest stem of the Crabapple flower with the other. Under the gaze of thousands of people, he began to chant, "You clap once, I clap once, a child wearing flowery clothes." This was a nursery rhyme? Even the most imaginative cultivator would not be able to imagine that he would use a nursery rhyme to communicate with 2 Jindan demons. But what they didn't know was that Lu Xiaoyi's fate-intercepting cluster was quietly revolving in his sea of consciousness, suddenly grabbing onto the Jiushi and Haitang Flower Mistress fate-intercepting cluster. This immediately caused the 2 monsters to be extremely terrified. Unfortunately, Lu Xiaoyi had grabbed onto their vital points. Their Fa was taken, their bloodline was taken, and the most frightening thing was that their fate-intercepting cluster could be taken at any time. This caused them to not dare to act blindly without thinking. In their sea of consciousness, another sentence was transmitted. It was not a nursery rhyme. "I'll speak, you listen. If you say no, I will destroy your body and soul." The 2 demons did not dare to act rashly as they felt that this human was extremely dangerous. Under the gaze of thousands of people, they could also feel that this person did not hide his killing intent. "You clap twice, I clap twice. 2 children braid their hair. It's all for fate. Don't tell me who's right and who's wrong. I don't want to hear it. You're lucky to have met me, so I won't covet your luck. But even if I don't care, it doesn't mean that I won't do it. Especially when I'm unhappy. Even if it's useless, I'll still take it." Thousands of cultivators looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. Listening to the strange and tuneless nursery rhyme that he was reciting, they felt that the world of cultivation had become unreal. How could a lunatic marry a Jindan? "You take 3 shots, I'll take 3 shots." The three kids are going to climb a mountain. Jiushi apologized to Haitang. Haitang immediately bloomed all the Haitang flowers in the Shanshui swamp. Since I lost the bet, I'll start with the two of you. Even if I can't kill you on the spot, I'll take away your luck so that you won't be able to reach the upper realm for the rest of your life. What happened next shocked everyone. The swordsman had only reached the third verse of his absurd nursery rhyme when the Haitang flower owner's tightly closed flower bun suddenly opened. Then, all the flower bun on the entire tree bloomed at the same time. Following that, all the Haitang bananas in the Shanshui swamp bloomed in the swamp as if they had sensed some kind of mystery. The color of the Shanshui swamp changed, and the expressions of countless cultivators changed. How did he do it? It didn't make sense. Apart from the sword, the swordsman also had such a mysterious ability. Almost everyone was stunned on the spot, including Gong Xiaodai, Nick Heng, Flower Burial, Ming Xiu, and the rest of the Jin Dan. The entire scene was under their perception. There were no ripples of mana or mental energy. The only ripples were the nursery rhyme. Lu Xiaoyi raised his head and smiled. I've won. Are the Haitang flowers mine now? Flower Burial Fairy felt her heart ache. But no matter how much it hurt, she could not hesitate in front of thousands of people. She could only bear the pain and give up her treasure. Fellow Taoist has won. The Haitang flower owner is yours. Whether it lives or dies, it's all up to you. Good. Lu Xiaoyi laughed loudly. As he laughed, Sword Chi suddenly surged out from the hand holding the Haitang flower owner. It was not only Sword Chi that rushed in, but also a few hungry sword spirits. In the blink of an eye, the Haitang flower owner could not even make a sound, let alone resist. She had already been turned into ashes by the Sword Chi. This scene caused the hearts of the earth cultivators present to tremble violently. They had already been tormented by this tossing and turning to the point that they had lost their ability to judge. Madman. A real madman. The Jiushi, who was still being held by the front paw, was almost limp on the ground. It did not know if it would be the next one. Compared to the Haitang flower owner, its attack might be stronger, but its defense was not as good. How could it withstand a casual attack from this savage? Flower Burial Fairy was furious. She didn't expect that the swordsman would dare to lay his hands on her in the next moment while she was still ringing in her ears. However, she could not say anything because she had already given the Haitang flower owner away. It no longer belonged to Splendid, but to the swordsman. Did the swordsman need to ask for her opinion on how to deal with his own things? At most, he did not care about the occasion and ruined everyone's mood. At this moment, Lu Xiaoyi's tone changed. He casually struck the Haitang flower owner's roots, creating a big hole. This humble Taoist's actions are not casual and bloodthirsty. Come take a look. Under his signal, countless cultivators' divine senses rushed to the bottom of the hole. There were piles of bones buried there, old and new. Lu Xiaoyi's voice sounded again. Recently, no cultivators have gone missing in the mountain river swamp. The cultivators were in an uproar, especially the small sects around Splendid Garden. In the past 200 years, there were always disciples who went missing. No one knew where they went, and no one could find them. It was impossible for all of them to be here, but some of them must be here. There were some cultivators that rushed over and began to search through the white bones. Even though they had lost the cover of Crabapple Flower Master, they were still able to find traces of their former disciples from the white bones. Moreover, he immediately made a discovery among the new bones. The scene was chaotic. The preaching conference turned into a funeral, a grievance conference, and a recital conference. The cultivators of Splendid Garden were miserable. After all, before the Haitang flower owner was sent away, it had always belonged to Splendid Garden. Then, shouldn't Splendid Garden take some responsibility for committing such a great crime against humanity? In the chaos, Lu Xiaoyi pulled the Jiushi away and asked through the communication of fate, "If I can't make the Haitang flower bloom, do you know what method your master will use to make the sea of flowers reappear?" The Jiushi finally calmed down. It was unwilling to face such a question, but in front of this savage, it could not pretend to be deaf and dumb. I know. As a mount, I am my master's meat shield in times of danger. Life and death, I know. Chapter 561. I've avenged you and cleared your name. I won't take away your fate, and I won't easily reveal your secrets to others. All of this might be for the small help I might need in a few decades or centuries. Are you willing to accept it? With Jioshu's current state of mind, how could he withstand such pressure? Even his master's dignity couldn't be compared to this vicious person's despotic power. As long as you don't harm my master's life, I'm willing to help you. Deal. Lu Xiaoyi smiled happily. The World Kuandao Conference in the Western regions finally ended after a few months. It was hard to say whether it was a success or not. At the end of the conference, the blooming of the crabapple flowers added color to the closing ceremony. However, the swordsman's superfluous actions added another variable to the conference. Under the crabapple tree, more than 10 cultivators' corpses cast a shadow over the peaceful, splendid garden. This made many people unhappy. On a large flying boat, more than 100 Xianyuan swordsmen were sitting neatly. They seemed to be closing their eyes and concentrating, but all of their ears were perked up. From time to time, they would sweep their gazes across the three figures in front of the boat. They keenly discovered that Martial Ant Yin Cheng was on the left, Martial Ant Gong Xiaodai was on the right, and the mysterious Jean Dan in the straw hat was in the middle. Then, who exactly was this person? Although the number of Jean Dan in the dome was not as terrifying as the number of Foundation establishment cultivators, there were still 2,000 or 3,000 of them. Among them, there were countless outstanding ones. Because they didn't use their swords, it was impossible to distinguish them. Why did you have to kill the crabapple flower master on the spot? Xiaoyi, you must have discovered something, so you acted so ruthlessly. Why didn't you wait until the conference was over? You could have done it in private. Splendid Garden would never protect such a sinister monster. This was the same question that Yin Cheng and Gong Xiaodai had. Lu Xiaoyi had done a good job at the beginning, resolving the matter by singing a nursery rhyme. However, the final massacre was completely unnecessary, and it only made the Xianyuan even more crazy. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. This pretense was over, but it would be troublesome to explain it clearly. Fortunately, the two senior sisters beside him were on his side and wouldn't ask too much. Do you think that I attacked the reputation of the three pure ones at the Kuan Dao meeting? The two of them fell into deep thought. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and continued, No, there is no need to attack the three pure ones anymore. Tens of thousands of years of grudges, it is not something that can be decided by a small bet. I want to teach Splendid Garden a lesson. This sect was located in the western regions, but it had secret dealings with the three clear ones and catered to them in every way possible. Not only did the three clear ones' disciples come in and out, but they were also very cooperative in their actions. This could be seen very clearly in the case of the Haitang Flower Master. The problem of the three pure ones is not a problem that can be solved in a short time, and it is also not a problem that can be eradicated at our level. However, since Splendid Garden was so brazen in the western regions, I think we need to teach them how to behave. They can't ignore the overall strategy of the Xianyuan in the western regions just because they're a force of Kuan cultivators. In Arai, even a powerful swordsman force like the Wei Sword Mountain had a difficult time under the siege of the three pure ones. All the forces that are on good terms with the sword vein have a difficult time. Incidents occur one after another. For example, the Kuan Dao separation boundary is almost always provoked by the surrounding forces. I have personally participated in it once, but it was just one of countless times. If you go there at any time, there will be trouble at any time. Then, why can the forces that are on good terms with the three pure ones live a good life in the western regions? This is the reason why I killed the Haitang Flower Master in public. It is because I want to tell her in front of everyone that Splendid Garden is humiliating her. Because they are wrong friends. Gong Xiaodai nodded. Xiaoyi is right. I will report your thoughts to the Thunderbolt Palace. For a sect like this, the pressure must be constant. We have to let them know the pain, and it must be endless pain. Yin Cheng did not object. The sect is indeed negligent in this aspect. We only pay attention to the big picture, like the myriad scenery sect. We are too lenient towards these small sects with their own characteristics. I will. Shouldn't you report this matter to the Rising Heaven Pavilion yourself, Xiaoyi? Lu Xiaoyi was indignant. Why should I report it? I've already been exiled. My relationship is about to be transferred away. I am not in my position. I am not involved in politics. What happens to the Western regions has nothing to do with me. Yin Cheng did not like to hear this. Xiaoyi, how is this exiled? In my eyes, if you give me such a chance, I will be more than happy. Let me tell you, although the blue sky realm is not as big as the Five Rings, and maybe a little inferior in terms of spiritual opportunity, it is still a superior cultivation boundary in the universe. It is a pure human cultivation environment. In its distant history, there was once a boundary of immortals. It is the holy land of the swordsman, and this will never change. Lu Xiaoyi raised his hand and begged for mercy. Okay, I will not be exiled. I will go to the Holy Land to further my studies. When I come back, I will be promoted by 3 ranks and will be greatly valued. I will become a strong candidate for the leadership of the Rising Heaven Pavilion. But you have to be careful. The abnormality of the Crabapple Flower Lord cannot be ruled out as a man-made cause. Splendid is the biggest suspect here, but it is also a dead end. If I did not kill it and insisted on finding the truth, it would push Splendid to the 3 pure ones. This is not the way to go. So I killed it. It is to leave room for you to maneuver. The final result, whether it is flat or round, will depend on you. I do not have time, and I am too lazy to waste my time on flowers and plants. Gong Xiaoti's bright eyes turned. Xiaoyi, you have a lot of secrets. We will not ask you what it is, but the next time you use your ability, it is not good to do it in public. It is better to restrain yourself. In the cultivation world, there are many people with ulterior motives. What you did today, someone may secretly remember it and cause trouble for you in the future. Yin Cheng agreed. Senior Marshal's sister is right. Xiaoyi, I'll be frank with you. You need to change your pretentious character. Lu Xiaoyi spread out his hands. I did not want to do it. But who asked that hickory pole fairy to choose me? She probably could not afford to offend the 2 of you, so she found a meat chicken like me. Actually, I was thinking that since I will be away from the 5th ring for a long time, I might as well have a good time. Lu Xiaoyi did not accompany them all the time, because this team of Kuan cultivators had other itineraries besides participating in the Kuan Dao convention. They had to communicate with a few sects that they were on good terms with. Of course, they had to go to enough places to be efficient. This was also the reason why he specially came to find Yin Cheng. If he really waited at the dome, it was very likely that he would not be able to see her. I am leaving. Lu Xiaoyi played it down. Although he might be gone for hundreds of years, it was hard to say whether there would be such a reunion when he returned. Live well. I do not want to be the only child of a lower 3 stars. Gong Xiaodai was still calm. Stop pretending. Stop showing off. Yin Cheng was much more direct. She understood this guy better and knew that behind his fear of trouble, there was actually a crazy heart. Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand and disappeared, leaving the 2 women there quietly looking at each other. Of course, there was also the surprise and gossip on the flying boat. There was no need to talk about Yin Cheng. Thousand Xiufeng was famous for her cold personality, and no one had heard of her having any connection with other Qian cultivators. Gong Xiaodai was the same. She was beautiful and enchanting, but she was famous for being ruthless and scheming in the Inner Sword sect. She was no longer a rose with thorns, but a snake and scorpion beauty. Who was the person that these 2 outstanding women were paying attention to? Chapter 562. Lu Xiaoyi slowly began to fly back. There was not much time left. What happened in the Mountain River Swamp had a great impact on him. His attitude did not prejudge any matter to be good or bad. Because the interception of luck had now merged with nature's luck, he had a good impression of nature creatures. This was also his usual attitude. Before approaching the Crabapple Flower Master, he began to have doubts. This was because the cooperation shown by the Hemp Pole Fairy's mount during the whole process did not match its ferocious and ugly appearance. If it were any other demonic beast that had not yet lost its wild nature, being controlled by a stranger, especially an unfamiliar enemy, would make them feel uneasy. Even if this was agreed by its master, in its subconscious, there would be a rejection from the bottom of its heart. But he could not feel it. Through contact, through the resonance of luck, he could accurately distinguish the inner emotional fluctuations of the Jiushi. But in the consciousness of this outwardly strong but inwardly weak Jiushi, he did not feel any consciousness of resistance. There could only be one conclusion. This Jiushi's temperament was weak. It could be innate, or it could be the result of long-term domestic rearing. Or it could be the combination of all these factors. This was probably the reason why it could only be a mount, and also the reason why the hemp pole fairy insisted that it was not her mount that provoked it first. This was not strange. The dragon had 9 sons, and each one was different. If the dragon was like this, then what about the Jiushi whose bloodline was countless times weaker? When he grabbed the stem of the crabapple flower master and absorbed the interception of luck, everything was clear. This crabapple flower master looked incomparably beautiful, but in fact, the things it did behind the scenes were incomparably bloody. It usually hid itself deeply and only showed its admirable beauty and low cultivation realm. It lured those foreign cultivators who did not know its background to approach, and then suddenly attacked. The specific cause and process was hard to say. Was it before or after it obtained the luck? Did the crabapple flower master have evil intentions? Or did the human cultivators have evil thoughts of plucking it? But one thing was very clear. The crabapple flower master had now become an out-and-out murderous evil spirit. Under its beautiful appearance, there were hidden fangs. Its bloody nature met the cowardly Jiushi, and it discovered the rare power of luck in the Jiushi's body. How could it bear such a temptation? Thus, there was a conflict. However, it had a small belly and was unable to swallow the Jiushi. It did not expect that although the Jiushi was weak, it would display an explosive strength when its life was threatened. It was a little helpless. The reason why the crabapple flower lord did not bloom and caused all the crabapple flowers in the mountain and spring swamp to close themselves off was not because they had been wronged and wanted to be compensated. It was a sign of weakness in front of the Jiushi. This was how they communicated with each other. The general meaning was, I admit defeat, please don't expose everything. He didn't know what the Jiushi was thinking, but it was clear that the Jiushi didn't have a strong will and didn't tell its master the truth. Perhaps it didn't know what to say. This was a matter of fate, and no creature was willing to reveal this secret. This was also what the Haidang flower master believed. It believed that the Jiushi would not reveal their secret. At the same time, it used the mountain and spring swamps crabapple flowers to express its apology. It wanted to avoid the attention of humans. If it wasn't for Lu Xiaoyi, it would have succeeded. At the level of Jindan, almost every creature with fate had a way to hide their own fate. Lu Xiaoyi was not the only smart person. Anyone with a little bit of intelligence would do everything possible to hide their fate. This was the key to survival. Lu Xiaoyi destroyed all of this. He liked nature, but it did not mean that he would tolerate everything. His thinking was simple. Humans should respect nature, and similarly, nature should respect humans. He did not attack the Jiushi and kill the crabapple flower master because it was his. However, the Jiushi was handed over to him by the hickory staff fairy. According to the rules of the cultivation world, under such circumstances, he could not attack. Even if it was a demonic beast of the 3 pure ones, this was the basic principle of a cultivator. Moreover, the Jiushi's behavior made him see a possibility of planting a spy in the 3 pure ones. He did not have the ability to control humans at the moment. Humans were the most complicated creatures. If he did not control them well, he would be devoured. However, demonic beasts were different. He gave the Jiushi face and helped it take revenge. He also had the same secret as the Jiushi. The most important thing was that the Jiushi had a weak personality. He could not use it now, and he might not use it in the future. This was a trap planted in advance. With the relationship between the Xianyuan and the three pure ones, who knew what would happen in the future? Nothing happened on the way back. He wobbled back to the dome and was immediately summoned by Immortal Rue. The Immortal Rue frowned. The departure date is near. You still have time to go sightseeing and looking for women? Lu Xiaoyi did not argue. I was thinking that since it is impossible to prepare everything, I might as well go there and think of a way. Immortal Rue scolded. Ridiculous. You know that you can't prepare everything, so you don't prepare anything? Why don't you know that you can't cultivate anymore? You know that it is useless to work hard, so you don't work hard? You know that you are going to die, so you don't want to live anymore? Do your best and leave the rest to heaven's will. This is the style of cultivators of my generation. Do you want to go there and look for other sects to take advantage of and dine and dash? Lu Xiaoyi laughed mischievously. Martial uncle, there will always be a big family with a big business, Immortal Rue snorted. Cigarette, but let me warn you. Don't underestimate the complexity of Clear Sky. Because of the disparity in overall strength, the three pure ones left behind in Clear Sky is much stronger than Xianyuan. We can maintain an equal footing with the three pure ones in the fifth ring. However, in Zhuozhou, the Supreme and the three pure ones still left behind a strong force. This is the foundation of the Dharma lineage. However, we are unable to maintain a strong position in both aspects. Xianyuan chose to be aggressive in the fifth ring because there are unlimited opportunities and more stages here. It is also because of this that we chose to be defensive in a peaceful place like Clear Sky. This is the main premise. Don't get mixed up. Do you think you can swagger around like you did in the fifth ring and do whatever you want? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Sure enough, it was not a good place. Senior Marshal's sister said it was a holy land. Was this the situation of a holy land? I'm just a brick. I will move wherever I am needed. Immortal Rue softened his tone. In fact, he did not approve of sending Cigarette, but back to Clear Sky. There were many suitable candidates in the Inner Sword. They were strong and experienced. The crushing strength that Cigarette but displayed when he was in the Foundation establishment realm was something that Jean Dan could not achieve. He had potential, but potential needed time to transform into strength. He had formed his gold core less than 40 years ago. In Jean Dan's 700 to 800 years of life, it was still too short. Immortal Rue thought that even if this kid had a lot of potential, he still needed 100 or 200 years to grow. It was a bit excessive. However, this was the opinion of the monarchs. Immortal Rue's objection was meaningless. Chapter 563. He threw over a jade talisman. With this talisman, you can go to the inner and outer storage of Thousand Shio Peak to collect some necessary materials. This is the support of the sect for you. Considering the mess you made on planet Hasa, this treatment is already beyond the law. You should be content. Lu Xiaoyi asked the question he was most concerned about. Martial uncle, what exactly am I going to do there? Can you give me a specific structure? Immortal Rue's answer was very vague. I can't explain anything to you now. Because it's too far away, I can't predict the situation in the other universe. When you go to Blue Sky, the Immortals and Supreme Immortals there will naturally take over. Just listen to their orders. They're the only ones who know the specific situation best. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Martial uncle, are you familiar with them? Immortal Rue laughed. Familiar? How can I not be familiar with them? The Rising Heaven Pavilion there and the Rising Heaven Pavilion here are interchangeable. Do you still remember the Immortal Chung who brought you to the fifth ring? He is now in Blue Sky. I don't know if he still remembers you. In the next 3 months, Lu Xiaoyi put all his energy into preparing various materials that he might need in the future direction of his cultivation. This also included the selection of various cultivation techniques in Boa Tower. He went through them again. Among them, he especially learned about the Blue Sky world. Fortunately, there were a lot of books about it. This was the ancestral land. Even if he hadn't set foot on that land, he could still have a deep understanding of it. This was a really deep understanding of it, including the countless secrets that had been hidden for tens of thousands of years. The more he read, the more he found it interesting. There was a gap that happened 11,000 years ago. Originally, Blue Sky had become a star area that was about to be abandoned. However, later on, it inexplicably recovered its status. The reason was the same as Planet Haas's revival of spiritual opportunity. However, the complexity behind it was not as simple as it seemed on paper. The news of him going to Blue Sky was not a secret of the sect, so there was no need to keep it a secret. He didn't intend to hide it from his closest friends. In fact, the route between the fifth ring and the left circle was the busiest route. Not only Xianyuan, but almost all the big and small sects had a very close and fixed connection with their home planet. Xianyuan was far from frequent. For example, the Supreme Three Purity Temple would send a large floating raft back and forth on this route every 3 years. Xianyuan Sword Sect's fixed frequency was once every 5 years. Even if it was by the antimatter space, it would take almost 5 years. That was to say, for sects like the Three Purity Temple, they would have 2 floating rafts of the route at the same time most of the time. For sects like the Three Purity, they would have 2 floating rafts at the same time most of the time, not including the ones from the opposite side. Lu Xiaoyi was about to take a fixed flight from Xianyuan. It carried both people and goods. In most cases, they would carry goods from the fifth ring to the left circle and carry people from the left circle back to the fifth ring. This was the tacit understanding of all the top sections. Even if the spiritium of the fifth ring was enough to last for hundreds of thousands of years, what would affect its survival would not be the spiritium, but other sudden changes. The big sects were well aware of this. Therefore, transporting core cultivator resources back to the home planet was a shady business that everyone was doing. Transporting the resources back and sealing them up just in case. Then, they would transport more cultivators and throw them into the vigorous universe, plundering. This was the typical bandit logic of the mortal world. The bandits would transport the precious treasures they had plundered back to their mountain, while they themselves would live a carefree life outside. When their children grew up, they would follow their elders into battle, forming a virtuous cycle. The problem now was that there were some disputes between the big and small bandits in the mountain. Therefore, the bandit group that was out hunting sent a fighter back. Regarding the Blue Sky swordsman who stayed behind to guard Xianyuan, he originally did not have the qualifications to obtain this information. He had to at least be in Yuanying, and he had to be a powerful person in Yuanying to know this information. However, since he was about to head to Blue Sky, there were some things that he did not need to hide from him. Only then did he know some things about Blue Sky's home. In Blue Sky, the most powerful people were perfected cultivators. Adding up all the perfected cultivators in Xuanyuan's sword faction, 30% of them stayed in Blue Sky. They took turns guarding it. For example, all the perfected cultivators that Lu Xiaoyi had come into contact with had stayed in Blue Sky for at least a few hundred years, and at most a few thousand years. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that Xianyuan valued their home so much that outsiders could not imagine. Of course, it was the same for the other top sections. The safety of their lair did not depend on their past reputation, but on their actual strength. Only true monarchs, who were the top cultivators, could truly ensure the safety of a sect and a domain. Only then could they deal with the endless troubles that came from the universe. The allocation of perfected cultivators was far worse. Of all the Yuanying perfected cultivators in Xianyuan, less than 10% remained in Blue Sky. There was no way to look further down. Even a foundation establishment cultivator with some potential like Yin Shun would be sent to the fifth ring on the floating raft once every 5 years. It was easy to imagine what kind of people were left behind. The upper realm of swordsmen was originally more difficult than Dharma cultivator, and after sending away the elites with potential, the success rate of the remaining people was so low that it made one's hair stand on end. Occasionally, there would be those who were lucky enough to succeed, but as long as they had a dream, they would request to go to the fifth ring, the melting pot. Those who stayed behind were few and far between. From the composition, it could be clearly seen that Xuanyuan's strategic attitude towards their home was that the two sides were big, and the middle was small. It was extremely unbalanced. The two sides referred to the perfected cultivators who were the strongest, and they were the ultimate power that ensured the safety of Mount E. The other side was the cultivation system of the mortal world, and it was basically foundation establishment cultivators with average aptitude who were in charge of this kind of work. But in the middle, the elites were basically all in the fifth ring. There was a bigger stage, more opportunities, and closer to the atmosphere of the war in the universe. It was something that the blue sky world, which was far away in a corner, could not compare to. In fact, this was also the strategic arrangement that most of the fifth ring powers had in their home. It could cultivate the most outstanding juniors to the greatest extent and ensure the safety of their home. Their defensive capabilities towards the direction of the universe were very strong, and they attached great importance to the cultivation system in the mortal world. The only flaw was that they lacked the middle, and they lacked the ability to control the changes within the domain. If the blue sky world only had Xinyuan, the three pure ones, and the Tai family, it would not have mattered. After all, everyone had the same strategy, and it did not matter if there were fewer people in the middle. But the problem was that there were other powers that did not place their focus on the fifth ring, but on their home, the blue sky world. Moreover, in the blue sky world, there were some powers and sects that could not leave the universe at all. They had to, and had no choice but to, put all their energy into the blue sky world. The sum of these powers, after 10,000 years of growth, naturally gave birth to some strange things. It was not that they wanted to pull down an overlord like Xinyuan, but they wanted to take a bite out of the cultivation of the domain, occupy more territory, and pull out a few strands of the overlord's hair when it dozed off. This was the situation. Chapter 564. Time passed in a flash. During this period, Lu Xiaoyi still had two unfinished business. The first was the whereabouts of Han Yan. If he was still in the fifth ring, he would not be in a hurry to find him. If fate brought them together, they would eventually meet. However, if he went to the Blue Sky sect and did not return for hundreds of years, then he had to at least give himself a reason to calm down. Through the sect's teleportation array, he was teleported to Weijin Mountain. Then, he went to the Kuandao world in a low-key manner. He was timid the entire time until he returned to the mountain. On Fangting Island, he did not receive any surprises. The Kuandao masters did not seem to have any reason to hide it from him. After harvesting an entire storage ring of candied haws, he could only return dejectedly. Han Yin had gone to an unknown place. This was the Kuandao masters' explanation. Looking at their apologetic gazes, he knew that he could not ask for too much. In the cultivation world, the most taboo was to force. He had his reasons, and others had their difficulties. Then, he would leave it to time. The second thing was, Master Gio, I'm going to the Blue Sky sect. Do you have any instructions? Or do you have any old friends that you need to send a message to? Standing in the small courtyard of the farmhouse, Lu Xiaoyi brought Master Gio's favorite food. A Jew appeared in the small courtyard with a big belly and looked at Lu Xiaoyi. Oh, Jindan, but your speed is a little slow. Go to the Blue Sky sect? Good place. It's also Master Gio's hometown, but I can't go with you because that damn heavy. Who should I send a letter to? Let me think. There doesn't seem to be anyone who can live for more than 10,000 years. No, there are a few, but you can't see them for the time being. There's a boat, a tower, and a tree. I don't know if they're still there. Good place. That's where the dream began. A Jew muttered as he stuffed his mouth with food. A rare memory appeared in his eyes. Lu Xiaoyi did not ask further. What damn heavy? What boat, tower, tree? He knew that, with his cultivation level, knowing these things would be asking for trouble, so he might as well not ask. He had enough troubles of his own. Master Gio, do you have any instructions? A Jew shook her head. She realized that she really could not help the human race at all. Those things that she thought were amazing were not attractive to this kid at all. This made it very sad. However, this was also good. Only in this way would he not walk down the same path. Only then would there be greater possibilities and a wider space. As a senior, as someone who had been through this before, it only needed to watch. Watching others grow up was also a very blissful thing. Of course, He had to remind them of what he needed to, so he acted mysteriously. Let me tell you, normally, I wouldn't even tell him. When you go to the Blue Sky Demon Mountain, don't dig a hole casually. Shit will be dug out. Lu Xiaoyi accompanied Ninth Master in the Nine Palaces realm for an entire day. After more than 200 years of interaction, he finally realized that this strange, fat Ninth Master did not have any requests or schemes for him. Sometimes he was very childish, sometimes very black-bellied, and sometimes a little neurotic. But the more it was like this, the more real it seemed, and it made people feel closer to it. Master Jiao, when I go there, I will miss you. Lu Xiaoyi left, leaving a Jew alone there wiping her tears. She was like an elder watching her child go out to explore the world. She was reluctant to part with him, but she knew that this was the general trend, and she could not stop it. She had tried her best to help this guy, but there was no result. She had thought that this was it, and their relationship was ordinary because of the bond between master and master. But now, she realized that human feelings were actually very simple. They did not need much help and did not need to pay much. As long as you paid attention, there would definitely be results. It was a cold and windy night. Heavy snow swirled in the air, and the cold wind was bone-piercing. At the foot of Dingjun Mountain, there was a place that was regarded as a top secret by the dome. It occupied a huge area. Dozens of huge stone caves were dug along the mountain. Inside them were the sharp weapons of the Xianyuan sword sect to conquer the universe. Large floating boats and super-large treasured ships. The reason why it was built at the foot of Dingjun Mountain was because, among the 13 peaks of the dome, only Dingjun Mountain was made of solid basalt. It was abnormally solid. Digging a hole here to store these treasures would ensure the greatest safety. Lu Xiaoyi was brought to this place by immortal Rue. They entered a huge stone cave, and then entered one of the large floating rafts that were anchored there. Then they began to wait quietly. These big guys could not be shrunk into the rafts. In the world of cultivation, only those small individual floating rafts with a certain weight and volume could be shrunk into the rafts. It was impossible to use spatial techniques on these huge objects. The world of cultivation also had its limitations. If you wanted to understand it as a world where you could put the stars into a storage ring, it would be purely a fool's dream. There were dozens of large stone caves here. The exact number of large floating rafts and treasured ships was Xuanyuan's core secret. It was impossible to know unless one reached a certain level. A small Jin Dan like Lu Xiaoyi obviously did not have such an opportunity. Fortunately, he was not interested in it. He was not the only Jin Dan who returned to Qingkong with the ships. There were several of them. This was also a method used by Xianyuan to mobilize the strength of the strong cultivators in Qingkong. When a Jindan cultivator reached the later stage, they would face the great hurdle of the upper realm yuanying. To be honest, the success rate was very low. There would always be various accidents that would force some of them to give up their dream of reaching the upper realm. For example, an incurable injury, old age, a crack in their Tao heart, failure to achieve results after many attempts, and so on. Some cultivators would slowly give up on the path to the upper realm and turn to other more practical directions to develop. For example, people like Gu Gang and the others who were in charge of the various halls of Xuanyuan's palace, or were sent out to establish their own clans, or were sent out to guard other planets. One of the most important tasks was to return to Qingkong to strengthen the backbone of the people there. Not everyone was willing to go. They were unfamiliar with the place and had to leave their homes. For cultivators like them who were older and nearing the end of their lifespans, not many were willing to leave their homes before death. However, those cultivators who came from Qingkong did not think so. They were sent to the fifth ring as the seeds of foundation establishment. They successfully bore Jin Dan, but were stopped before yuanying. If they could return to their home planet, Qingkong, in the last few decades of their lives, it would be the greatest happiness for them. Therefore, every time a floating raft returned, more or less, there would be a few Jin Dan cultivators following. Their wish was to use their last few decades of energy to contribute to their home planet. Of course, there were also those who returned to their roots. They wanted to see their hometowns and see what their clans thought. Regarding this, the sect never refused. They were very familiar with each other. After all, they had fought together in the Fifth Ring for hundreds of years. Lu Xiaoyi was the only special one here, but no one asked him about his purpose. After hundreds of years of cultivation, they were already used to such abnormalities. Since it was the sect's arrangement, there must be a reason for it. It was not up to them to care. Chapter 565. The large floating raft was filled to the brim. In the cultivation world, there were some things that could be placed in a space bag, but there were also some that couldn't. A floating raft of a certain size was still necessary. Once everything was ready, the three true monarchs boarded the raft, and the journey began. It was only at this moment that Lu Xiaoyi began to understand what the foundation of a sect was, and what a top-notch sect was. Just like Xin Yuan, in order to maintain such a large scale, 30% of the true monarchs were needed in the Clear Sky sect. True monarchs were needed in order to travel through the universe, defend the headquarters of the Five Rings, and hunt outside. In addition, there were those who went out to travel for their own purposes. For an ordinary sect, a dozen true monarchs were not enough. Just like the route between the Five Rings and the Clear Sky sect, 3 true monarchs boarded at once, and 1 Yuaning true monarch was not brought along. This meant that even though they were familiar with the route and had traveled it countless times, the swordsmen were still prepared to fight at any time. 5 years was the distance between the Five Rings and Zhuizhou, and this was through the anti-material space. Perhaps 5 years was not a long time for a true monarch, but to the Jindan, they would not be able to travel like this too many times. Perfected immortals could travel through the universe without affecting their own understanding of cultivation, because what they were comprehending now was the Tao state, the great Tao, and other mysterious things. However, golden core cultivators were still stuck at the stage where they needed space spiritium, which had an obvious impact on their individual cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi was still all right. The sword spirits were breaking through on the Bolang slope, and his martial arts were mostly related to the stars, so he was not affected much. The only ones affected were the other Jindan, but considering their current situation, it did not matter whether they cultivated or not. Other than Lu Xiaoyi, there were 6 other Jindan accompanying them, all of whom were from the external sword vein. From this, one could see the difference in the sword heart between the inner and outer sword veins. It was not without reason that the inner sword had led Xin Yuan for tens of thousands of years. They would occasionally converse with each other, but they rarely talked about themselves. For cultivators who had reached this stage, they were all failures and sad people, who would be willing to talk about their own unbearable matters. Among them, there was a senior brother named Tianmin who was the most talkative. Lu Xiaoyi would often ask him about the local customs and geography of the Clear Sky continent in his free time. Although Tianmin had left the Clear Sky continent for hundreds of years, he had grown up in the Clear Sky continent after all. He had achieved success in his cultivation and only went to the 5th ring after reaching the foundation establishment stage. Hundreds of years were just the blink of an eye for a domain, so his introduction was very practical. After all, it was different from a book. You have to be careful of Buddhism. Tianmin's reminder received the approval of the other Jindan disciples. They had more or less guessed the purpose of this young Jindan's trip to the Clear Sky continent. Cigarette Butt's name was very famous among the external sword veins of the Thousand Virtues Peak. He had broken the myth of the inner sword's dominance for tens of thousands of years when he was only at the foundation establishment stage. However, they did not agree with his trip to the Clear Sky continent this time. After all, Jindan and foundation establishment were 2 different concepts. What could be done in the foundation establishment stage might not be the same in the Jindan stage. They were more inclined to continue their studies for a period of time, at least 100 years. 200 years would be safer, but no one listened to their words. They were just grumbling. The Buddhist sect is flourishing in the Clear Sky continent now. The Fangzhong Island, the Thousand Islands region, and the Chuishang Plateau are all under the Buddhist sect's control. They did not establish themselves in the Five Rings, but chose to develop in a certain star field in the universe to the left. It didn't seem to be going well, so they placed their focus on the clear sky continent. As a result, the strength of the Taoist sect became slightly weaker. Some of the original Taoist powers have declined, while others have suddenly risen. After tens of thousands of years, the world has changed, and the changes are not small. It's normal for them to have some ideas. Lu Xiaoyi had a very important question. In the clear sky continent, is the rivalry between Xianyuan and the three pure ones still the same as in the five rings? Is it more intense? Or is it softer? Tianmin nodded. You've asked the main point. The rivalry between Xianyuan and the three pure ones has never changed. No matter where it is, it's just that the methods are different. In the five rings, it's more direct. This is also the influence of the five rings environment. In the clear sky continent, it's softer because they have more helpers. They don't need to rush to the front. Lu Xiaoyi understood. Senior brother, what you mean is that the three pure ones instigated and supported those small and medium-sized powers. Tianmin sighed. That's right. Otherwise, how would those small and medium-sized powers dare to be disrespectful to Xianyuan in the clear sky continent? This is the most powerful thing about the Dharma lineage. They may not be able to defeat you in a cultivation war, but they can harass you for tens of thousands of years. Wherever you have territory, they can find more disciples of the Dharma lineage. They will constantly nibble away and incite conflicts, and they will profit from it. If they can't do it once, they will do it again. There will be no end to it. Lu Xiaoyi pondered. And the perfected lords are not of much use at this level? Tianmin nodded. That's right. The perfected lords are dealing with the major matters of the universe, including the perfected ones. This is the most disgusting thing about the three pure ones. They strictly abide by the principle of high-level cultivators not participating in internal conflicts. Their goal is to prevent the high-level cultivators of Xianyuan from interfering in internal affairs. The high-level cultivators are crippled. They are competing with the low-level Jin Dan Foundation establishment. Our Xianyuan sword vein is alone in the clear sky continent. We are weak, but the Dharma lineage is blossoming everywhere. Young people with potential go to the five rings. The result is that the low-level cultivators in the clear sky continent are stretched. There are not enough of them, and their quality is not good either. You can imagine their situation. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The three pure one strategy was very clever. It was a completely open scheme. They were competing with each other's foundation. If the young disciples of clear sky continent did not support the five rings, but formed their own system in the clear sky continent, the situation would be much better. However, this also meant that the power of the five rings would be weakened. More importantly, the five rings would have abundant spiritual opportunity, but the foundation establishment cultivators of clear sky continent would not be able to enjoy it. This was a contradiction. Xuanyuan's countermeasure was to send the outstanding foundation establishment and Jindan Foundation establishment cultivators to the five rings. They would cultivate in the best environment for spiritual opportunity, in the most intense cultivation atmosphere, but they would struggle to survive in the clear sky continent. And he was sent back to stir up *T. It was basically impossible to achieve this with one person's strength. He was afraid that he would only be able to turn the situation around during crucial events. This pressure was really not ordinary. How is the relationship between Buddhism and the Dharma lineage? Tianmin smiled bitterly. Not much. The problem is that there are no fools in the cultivation world. No matter how bad the relationship between the two sects is, they are not stupid enough to fight each other and let our sword vein benefit from it. They're all squeezing each other dry. It's just that we can't compare to the foundation of the Dharma lineage, and we can't compare to the Buddhists who are focused on one realm. This is a bit of a disadvantage. If you want to find a way to make the two sects fall out, it's difficult. Chapter 566. There was nothing interesting about traveling in the antimatter space. It was far from the grandeur of the main world's starry skies. The celestial phenomena were endless, so traveling was actually very boring. Lu Xiaoyi seized the time to make up for his cultivation in the antimatter space. Since he needed to constantly switch back and forth between the positive and negative space to practice the star system cultivation method, in fact, this kind of travel in the antimatter space was very suitable for him. There was always an end to the road. One day, 5 years later, the floating raft began to slow down. Everyone in Jindan realized that this boring trip was coming to an end. Lu Xiaoyi was already very familiar with this process. Positioning, slowing down, breaking through barriers, passing through. He suddenly thought of the floating raft that was stuck in the passage between the positive and negative space when he formed his Oris core. He wondered how he would feel if he was stuck there. However, he was already very familiar with the technique of entering and exiting the positive and negative space. If there were no human factors, there would be no accidents. On the left, there was a peaceful star system. Ever since the floating raft had jumped out, Lu Xiaoyi had been trying his best to communicate with the stars in this star system. The results surprised him. This place seemed to be the home of the stars. The star map in his body felt as if it was about to light up. Using the star system here, the power of his star system techniques increased by almost 10%. This was good news, especially for someone like him who came here to be a hired thug. The surrounding stars were dazzling. From the book, Lu Xiaoyi knew that there were 13 cultivation realms in the Left Zhou galaxy. They were all once high-class cultivation realms. However, 10,000 years ago, there was a large-scale spiritual collapse in the Left Zhou galaxy. In the subsequent recovery process, some realms never recovered. Now, there were only 7 realms in the Left Zhou galaxy that still maintained the characteristics of a high-class cultivation environment. The rest had all been destroyed by time. 7? It was a little similar to the Big Dipper he practiced. It was also a long ladle. He still did not have the ability to investigate the secrets of the Left Zhou galaxy. This was not within his current scope of abilities. However, he would definitely do in the future. The Holy Land of Xuanyuan's sword vein. Does it sound like a big shot? The floating raft sped along, and within a few days, a green mid-sized planet appeared in his line of sight. It was much larger than the lower 3 stars, yet much smaller than the 5th ring. It was a planet brimming with vitality. This was Lu Xiaoyi's initial impression of the green sky. Among the 7 Jindan, he was the most normal. He was considered someone who had been in the universe for a long time, so he no longer had the excitement of a rookie when it came to descending on different planets. However, the other 6 Jindan were different. Some had tears streaming down their faces, some were staring in a daze, and some were muttering unconsciously. Lu Xiaoyi could understand their feelings. Mortals had left home at a young age for dozens of years. After working hard for their entire lives, they were finally able to return to their roots in their remaining years. What kind of feelings did these Jindan have? On this point, there was no difference between a cultivator and a mortal. This was the emotional blind spot that humans were born with and could never be erased. The floating raft began to decelerate once again. After finding a spot, it cut through the atmosphere. After passing through the first thick layer of clouds, their vision cleared. Under the clear sky, a huge snowy mountain range appeared before their eyes. It was ancient, heavy, and silently stood there. The vicissitudes of history and the sharpening of metal made this snowy mountain range, which did not seem as majestic as the 5th ring's dome, have a sharpness of its own. It was pure. This was not something that was given to it by appearance, but was shaped by history. This was Mount E. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Senior sister was right. This was the holy land of Xuanyuan's sword vein, and it was fully deserving of the title. The floating raft landed under the glow of the snowy mountain. It was also a spacious rocky land. There were dozens of huge caves on the surrounding rock walls. Obviously, the purpose of this place was the same as the caves under Dingjun Peak in the 5th ring, which was to store large floating rafts. Judging from a number of caves, the Blue Sky Mountain would always be the last home of the Xianyuan sword sect. Defend Mount E, and Xianyuan will live forever. On the ground, there was a large group of cultivators waiting. There were perfected cultivators perfected cultivators and Jindan. They were going to carry out the handover on the spot. This was also the tradition of the swordsmen. They were not used to stopping and resting for a few months. They would drag on the handover and take their time to set sail. In the words of the Heavenly Gate, this was a wartime rule. Within 2 hours, the goods and personnel had to be handed over. The floating raft had to rise again. If they wanted to rest, they had to return to the fifth ring. The significance of this was that the Xianyuan swordsmen could always maintain the state of being ready to go to war at any time. They would not be delayed by trivial matters, and they would not slack off because of the habits they had developed over time. Hearing the news of war and moving in full force was not something that could be represented by just a few words. It was also not something that could be achieved just by having this belief in one's heart. It also needed to be cultivated in daily life to be able to truly achieve the level of flying swords flying through the sky with a single command. There were specialized, perfected cultivators who took inventory of goods, one by one, the quantity and quality, and then moved down. Lu Xiaoyi and 7 other Jindan cultivators got off the raft, followed by hundreds of young Zhuji cultivators. There were also a few lucky Jindan cultivators who formed their Jindan in the Blue Sky sect. They were all going to the fifth ring to start another magnificent cultivation life. A few perfected cultivators were chatting there, exchanging information about the major events of the past 5 years. After an hour, all the exchanges were completed. The 3 perfected cultivators returned to the floating raft and immediately soared into the sky, disappearing without a trace. They were about to begin their next 5-year journey. Lu Xiaoyi was very emotional. This was probably the difference between the sword vein and the Dharma vein. The sword vein was able to compress time to the extreme, perfectly complementing the swordsman's characteristic of doing everything quickly. It was able to fully ensure that they would not be at a disadvantage in battle despite having fewer people. All of this had to be done bit by bit in life and cultivation. 2 perfected cultivators came over, and one of them announced, Tianmin, Tinxiang, the 6 of you, follow me. The Soaring Heaven Pavilion will arrange new positions for you. His name was not mentioned, but Lu Xiaoyi was not surprised. After all, he had returned for a different purpose in the first place. He had not returned to retire as a rice worm. The other perfected cultivator looked at him suspiciously. Cigarette, but do you understand your responsibility in coming to the Blue Sky Pavilion this time? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Understand. Allow me to settle down for a while, then I will report to the Soaring Heaven Pavilion. However, the perfected cultivator interrupted him. There's no time to settle down. There's an important dispute that requires support right now. The mission overview and background are all in the Jade Slip, and there's also a map of the northern region. You can directly teleport there. That'll be faster. Lu Xiaoyi did not refute. He had come here to work. To a cultivator, there was no such thing as rest. Was 5 years of rest on the floating raft not enough? He had just soared into the air when he landed back down. Sorry, Marshal Uncle, where do I teleport? The perfected cultivator led the way in front and instructed, the main teleportation array of Mount Shao is at Rainbow Hollow. This place is different from the fifth ring. At the very least, many places in the northern region can be teleported there. There's no need to fly or hurry there. All the teleportation arrays in the northern region are on the map I gave you. You have to familiarize yourself with them as soon as possible. In the future, this will be your most important method of action. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It seemed that the pace of his days in the Blue Sky Pavilion was very fast. Chapter 567. While he was on his way to Rainbow Hollow, Lu Xiaoyi hurriedly glanced at the mission Jade Slip. He had a rough idea of the whole story. The good thing about the mission in the northern region was that he didn't have to investigate, verify, or discover the truth. Xianyuan had been in his territory for tens of thousands of years. Their power was deeply entrenched, and nothing could be hidden from them. Lu Xiaoyi's main task was to solve it. It was to be a hired thug. In the cultivation world, no matter how you planned, in the end, you still had to rely on your strength to speak. Rainbow Hollow was the transmission pivot of Xinyuan Sword Sect in the northern region. Dozens of transmission formations were arranged in an orderly manner. It was a spectacular sight. They led to all parts of the northern region, including the main sects, cities, and important places. It was guaranteed that no matter where you went in the northern region, you would be able to find the nearest transmission point. The remaining distance could be covered by flying in a very short time. Jima Peninsula? After comparing the mission Jade Slip and the map, Lu Xiaoi confirmed his transmission point, but he still asked. The Immortal nodded. Yes, Jima Peninsula. The Azure Sky world was divided into 7 regions, including the Donglin continent, the Shigas Sand continent, the Namluo Peace continent, the Hanzhou continent of the northern region, the Chuanshan Plateau, the Thousand Island region, and the Fangzhong Buddhist kingdom. Among them, the East, South, West, and North continents were the largest continents, each with dozens of countries. This was a domain with a long history. Over the long river of time, the forces of cultivation had constantly changed. Let's not talk about the distant past, because it was meaningless to talk about it too far away. 11,000 years ago, the cultivation landscape of the Azure Sky Big World had undergone an earth-shaking change. There were 2 reasons for the change. First, earlier on, the Azure Sky world of cultivation participated in the magnificent expedition to Sirius. After their success, they named the Sirius Star region as the 5 Rings. Since then, they had a broader and more spiritual world. No one was willing to give up such a world, so a large-scale interstellar migration began. The sects and forces with some strength all had their own territories on the 5 Rings, which was the embryonic form of the 5 Rings. However, the mother planet Blue Sky was also undergoing a huge change. This was because a large number of top-notch factions and sects had begun to shift their attention to the 5th ring. Naturally, this created a certain degree of power vacuum in Blue Sky. Heroes rose from all directions, each displaying their own abilities. This was the first reason. The second reason was even more fatal. In the thousands of years after a large number of cultivators began to leave the Blue Sky Great World, the spiritual vigor of the Blue Sky Great World began to show signs of collapse. The same situation also occurred in the other realms of the left peripheral galaxy. It was a mysterious phenomenon of the entire galaxy's spiritual vigor disappearing. This was a nightmare for cultivators. Without spiritual opportunity, or if the spiritual opportunity was maintained at an extremely low level, this place would become a low-level cultivation realm. How could there be any future? If the first interstellar migration was to pursue a better cultivation environment, then the second interstellar migration was purely because they had no choice. It was more tragic, and more helpless. It was still better for the big sects as they had their own way of leaving. However, it was a pity for those forces whose highest level of cultivation was only Jindan. They could only guard their realms and had nowhere to go. They could not count on those big sects to be kind. They were already struggling to make ends meet when they moved, let alone these small sects that were as numerous as the hairs on a cow. This was the darkest moment of the Blue Sky Great World of cultivation. In the thousands of years, almost the entire bottom layer of the cultivation world was destroyed. The spiritual vigor was weak and could not produce new blood. Countless orthodoxies had broken off, other than a few top sects that still had a trace of power left due to historical reasons. The rest of the cultivation forces were almost completely wiped out. The change occurred 11,000 years ago. Due to a reason that he still did not understand, the spiritual vigor of the left peripheral galaxy began to recover overnight. It was a mysterious recovery, just like how it mysteriously disappeared in the beginning. Needless to say, this was bound to cause an even bigger wave of return. With this departure and return, 90% of the original middle and low cultivation forces of the Blue Sky Great World were gone. The entire structure of the world had undergone earth-shaking changes. The former glory was gone, but a single spark could start a prairie fire. After 10,000 years of growth, part of the orthodoxies returned. Under the nourishment of the spiritual vigor, various cultivation forces developed tenaciously again. However, the structure of the world was very different from 10,000 years ago. Let's not talk about the distant places. Let's talk about the northern region, the Jima Peninsula. This was originally the territory of another sect in the northern region that could compete with the Xianyuan sword sect, the Surging Waves Pavilion. However, the Surging Waves Pavilion was the first to act in the expedition against the Celestial Wolf sect. They did not put in any effort. As a result, the Surging Waves Pavilion was only given a very small piece of land in the Fifth Ring, which was not even as large as the Koindali realm. This caused the originally powerful Dharma cultivation sect to fall into a dilemma. They had no choice but to focus on their home planet, the Blue Sky Great World, because their strength was not enough to compete in the Fifth Ring. As the spiritual vigor of the Blue Sky Great World collapsed, the situation worsened, and they had no choice but to move all their members to the Fifth Ring. In that period of history, the strength of the Xianyuan sword sect increased by leaps and bounds. With proper strategies and brave cultivators, they laid a solid foundation for the sect's strength in the future. On the other hand, the Surging Waves Pavilion, which was also a big sect in the northern region, wavered between the Fifth Ring and the Blue Sky Great World. They missed the opportunity to develop, and their strength became weaker and weaker. In the end, they could only struggle at death's door in the Fifth Ring. Although they were also of the Dharma cultivation sect, they had a harmonious relationship with the Xianyuan sect for a long time. In addition, they did not think about making progress, so they did not adapt to the Fifth Ring's cultivation environment. They also could not tolerate the Dharma cultivation giants like the Supreme Three Pure Ones. The turning point appeared after the Blue Sky Great World spiritual vigor recovered. After careful consideration, the Surging Waves Pavilion decided to put most of their strength in the Blue Sky Great World. However, they had already lost their foothold in the Blue Sky Great World. It was not driven away by others, but by their own initiative to withdraw because of the spiritual vigor. Back then, there was only one decisive force, the Xianyuan sword sect. Even the Three Pure Ones at that time did not dare to speak in front of Xianyuan. During that short period of time, Xianyuan was at its most glorious. In the Blue Sky Great World and the Fifth Ring, no one dared to doubt their words. This was because it was said that Xianyuan had a swordsman who became an immortal. The recovery of the Zhuo spiritual vigor was also thanks to this immortal. At that time, there were only a few top sects left in the Blue Sky Great World. Xianyuan, the Three Pure Ones, Tai Yi, the Ju Zen Temple. When the Blue Sky Great World spiritual vigor recovered, it immediately caused the original powers to fight for it. However, if they wanted to re-enter the upper realm, they could not avoid Xianyuan. Without Xuanyuan's approval, no one dared to return. They were all afraid of angering the Xianyuan immortal. It was said that the immortal had a bad temper and had countless blood debts. Under such circumstances, Xianyuan and the various powers reached an agreement to redistribute the continents in the Blue Sky Great World in the long run. Taoist giants like the Three Pure Ones had no choice but to lower their heads. Originally, among the Three Pure Ones, Tai Ching occupied Nanluo Ning Prefecture, Shanqing occupied Zaigosa Prefecture, and Yuqing dominated Donghai Lin Prefecture. They occupied 3 of the 4 most important prefectures. How could Xianyuan at that time tolerate this? Therefore, the first condition of redistributing the prefectures was for Yuqing to leave Donghai Lin Prefecture and go to Nanluo Ning Prefecture to be neighbors with Tai Ching. The Three Pure Ones went from having 3 prefectures in the Blue Sky Great World to having 2. This was the price of compromise. There were countless similar disputes between Xianyuan and the Three Pure Ones that could not be mediated. In fact, it was not like it was bullying who. In a period of time, whoever was stronger had the advantage. Every dog has its day. This was the essence of it. Chapter 568. This empty Eastern Sea Lin state was given to a few other orthodoxies, including the Surging Waves Pavilion, There could only be one master in Han State of the northern region. It could only be Xian Yuan. The Surging Waves Pavilion knew this very well. They did not dare to fight for it, nor did they want to stay in the northern region. The pressure on Mount Shao was too great, and it was not good for the growth of young people. Therefore, they were satisfied with Xuan Yuan's arrangement. Xian Yuan had made many similar arrangements. Of course, he tried his best to arrange the sects and forces that were close to him to come back, and kept those loyal old officials of the Three Pure Ones out of the door. He also arranged the Surging Waves Pavilion in Donghai, and found the Qianzhao Temple and let them return to the Chuanshan Plateau. The history was very complicated. Even a cultivator like Lu Xiaoyi would have a headache reading it. He could only get a general understanding of it for the time being. Jima Peninsula was where the original Surging Waves Pavilion was located. Now that the Surging Waves Pavilion was empty, it became an ownerless place, which caused countless small sects to fight for it. Of course, no matter how they fought for it, they had to pay tribute to the overlord Xian Yuan, which was inevitable. Because of the terrain, Mount E was located in the northernmost part of the snowy mountain range, while Mount G was located in the southernmost part of the coast. They were far apart. When there were two major forces, such a location was perfect. But now there was only Xian Yuan here, so it felt a little out of reach, especially when the middle and low-level disciples of Xian Yuan were not strong enough. There were countless disputes, and Xian Yuan was also in a terrible fix. The ice guest hugged her master nervously. Master, what's wrong with you? Is your internal disease acting up? I have already given you the heaven-mending pill. If you know, tell me what to do. Spells were flying above their heads, and there were countless spectators below, waving flags and shouting, and watching the enemy. But no one cared about the few Foundation establishment swordsmen in the corner of the battlefield. The Jin Dan swordsman was lying on the ground. He could not move his chi by himself, so he could only look to the north. His disciple, the ice guest, cried, Master, I have sent a green bird message to Mount Shao. I think reinforcements will be here soon. Please hold on a little longer. When the martial uncles arrive, everything will be fine. Jin Dan swordsman coughed up a mouthful of blood and fainted. Another Foundation establishment cultivator suggested, Senior Brother Bang Ku, martial uncle has fainted. Do you think we should leave this place first? It's too dangerous here. If any magical techniques slip through, without Senior Uncle, how are we supposed to defend against them? The ice guest shook her head resolutely. No way. The green bird has already sent a message. I don't know which martial uncle is coming. If he can't see us and doesn't understand the cause and effect, it will be troublesome. Moreover, it will also delay the treatment of Master. We will wait here and not go anywhere. I don't believe that these heartless bastards would dare to do anything to us. The swordsmen were speechless. Even their senior uncle had been reduced to such a state. What's there to boast about? However, they couldn't say anything discouraging, so they could only wait for the situation to develop. Overall, as long as they didn't recklessly get involved, there probably wouldn't be any trouble. The ice guest hugged her master, sorrow welling up in her heart. The few of them had followed their master to mediate the Battle of Jima Peninsula. It wasn't part of the fixed plan. Suan Yuan's arrangements in the northern region had always been lacking in manpower. There were less than 200 Jin Dan cultivators in Mount Shao. Excluding those who still wanted to strive for a higher position, those who were engaged in education in various halls, those who were too old and weak to fly, and those who had left their sects to establish families. There were only a few dozen who were truly capable of carrying out missions in the northern region. The northern region was so big that it was really impossible to allocate manpower. In view of the many disputes between the various small and medium-sized forces, they simply divided the work into different areas. Each area was assigned a Jin Dan cultivator and several Foundation establishment cultivators to patrol and deal with the countless troubles. Actually, these low-level cultivators couldn't understand why an overlord like Suan Yuan would end up in such a state in his own territory. Was the fifth ring so important? If they sent a few strong cultivators back, these sneaky cultivators would be wiped out immediately. How would they end up in such a situation? Their level was limited, so of course, they couldn't understand the direction of the decisions made by the higher-ups. It was normal for them to have such complaints. Now, the middle and low-level cultivators left in Mount Shao were all crooked. They were the leftovers, or those who didn't have lofty ideals and lacked the will of a swordsman. This was also the norm in the cultivation world. After all, only a few people were truly qualified to become a qualified swordsman. Not everyone had a tenacious and indomitable heart. Mediocrity was always the main tone. The master and the apprentices, as well as a few senior and junior brothers, were the core forces in charge of maintaining order in Jima Peninsula. It sounded a bit ridiculous, but it was the truth. Immortals and immortals wouldn't appear in the battles within the northern region. This was the principle that the major sects in Green Sky Sect kept an eye on each other. But recently, the attitude of Mount Shao had changed. In order to stabilize the increasing disputes among cultivators near the South Sea of the northern region, they intended to support an obedient sect to manage this place. This might also be the reason for the conflict. Chapter 569. The Narcissus sect had a long history of thousands of years. Actually, everyone knew who was behind them. It was the Surging Waves Pavilion in the Eastern Sea, because they were still brooding over their former residence. Even though the Surging Waves Pavilion could never be taken back, they still supported a sect to guard this place. It could be said that they were doing the ancestors of the sect a little justice. The Chronicle Temple had an even longer history, spanning thousands of years. It had always been mild and cautious in its speech and actions. However, its strength was restrained, and there were always outstanding people appearing. After a long time, it could no longer be hidden. After all, everyone was so familiar with each other. Their backing was the three pure ones. However, they always followed the rules. It was difficult for Xianyuan to grasp their weakness. There were so many Taoist temples in the world, they could not rely on rumors and guesses. The Dushan sect was a body cultivator sect. It was established relatively late, less than 1,000 years ago. Xianyuan suspected that it was a Buddhist sect, but there was no evidence. The Buddhist sect's mastery of body techniques was not below that of body cultivators. It was not impossible for them to adapt and change their appearance. The last force was the South Sea Demon Clan. It was unknown what was wrong with them, but they still wanted to come ashore to test their skills. These four forces fought over the possibility that Xianyuan might designate the Jima Peninsula as a free land. They fought over the right to speak and gain actual control. Then, they would negotiate with Xianyuan about the future rules and regulations. When Bing Ke's master arrived with her disciples, the fight had already turned into a mess. Although this Jin Dan swordsman's strength was average, he was ambitious. As the overlord of the northern region, he had a good grasp of his identity. He rashly entered the fight and tried to stop a large-scale conflict. He thought that with Xuanyuan's identity, no one would dare to be presumptuous. In the end, he went overboard. His thinking was right. Xianyuan had the responsibility to control the situation of the northern region. He would not allow the situation to escalate. Now was a fight between Jindan cultivators. In the future, it might expand to Foundation Establishment cultivators. It would be too late to stop it when it involved mortals. It would also be detrimental to Xuanyuan's image in the northern region. His thinking was good, but he did not consider his own ability. In a chaotic battle, there would always be people stirring up trouble and taking advantage of it, and he became the catalyst for the chaos. Who was it that hurt him? The ice guest and the other laying foundation cultivators couldn't understand it either. The sky was too messy, and it was filled with spells. It seemed that anyone could do it, but it also seemed that no one did it on purpose. But now, the overlord Xianyuan was standing at the side, as if he had become a spectator. It was very awkward. He might as well not have come. Bing Ke felt aggrieved and let his imagination run wild. Originally, he liked to watch cultivators fight, but in his eyes, it became boring. Until he heard the voice of his junior fellow apprentice, Bing Xuan. Senior brother, martial uncle, He doesn't seem to be able to make it. Only then did the ice guest come to her senses. She felt that the breath of her master in her arms began to disperse, sometimes strong and sometimes weak. She knew that this was a sign of collapse, and she felt sad. At this moment, a voice came from the side. "Help him! Hurry up and leave." The icy guest was furious. Someone actually instigated him to kill his master. Was he still human? He turned around and saw an unfamiliar young man with a sword on his back standing at the side. He didn't look at him, but only focused on the battle in the sky. Judging from his breath, he should be a Jean Dan. The few laying foundation disciples immediately understood that this was the support from Mount E. But they didn't know why he didn't go up to stop the fight, but was here to instigate him to kill his master. "Marshal, uncle. Master is dying. Please save him." Lu Xiaoyi didn't even look. This senior fellow apprentice's dantian was already shattered, and even a deity couldn't save him. Moreover, in this last period of time, he would be tortured by losing the protection of his mana. What disappointed him was that these laying foundation disciples were too soft and emotional. They didn't have a trace of the ruthlessness of a swordsman. A real swordsman was ruthless to others and to himself. "I cultivate the sword, not the art of alchemy. Your master is incurable. If you dawdle, you will only make him suffer. You are his disciple. Even if you can't solve his problem, can't you solve his pain?" The icy guest was at a loss. The hierarchy in Xianyuan was very strict. Master was not here, and Martial Uncle's words were heaven. He also knew that Martial Uncle's words were very reasonable. After all, he had the cultivation of the late stage of laying foundation. He had common sense. He knew that once a cultivator lost the protection of his mana, his bodily functions would return to the tolerance level of a mortal. Facing this kind of damage, it was really torturous. But if you kill your master, you will be punished by heaven. Lu Xiaoyi disdained. Heaven's punishment is only for those who deserve it. Heaven is not that blind. The icy guest cried out loudly. As he cried, he moved his palm to his master's chest. He called his master and exerted force in his palm, shattering his master's heart acupoint. At the last moment, he saw a trace of a smile at the corner of his master's mouth after he was released. Until now, he finally accepted this martial uncle because his master didn't blame him. As a disciple, he did what he should do. Who can tell me what's going on here? The ice guest's heart was still agitated, and she was uneasy. Beside her, Bing Shuang was still calm. She told the whole story from beginning to end. Lu Xiaoyi remained calm and collected. This senior brother was injured by a spell. The cold entered his body and spread throughout his meridians. He could only roughly see this. As for what kind of spell it was and which orthodoxy it came from, it was difficult for him. He had been observing the fight between the Tenjin Dan and the sky for some time, but unfortunately, he couldn't see anything. Moreover, the one who really did it would definitely hide his skills and wouldn't continue to use his dark skills in public. Therefore, this was not a way out. "Do you know these people?" The icy guest finally recovered. "I don't know them, but my master has mentioned them before, so I have some impression of them. The ones for Narcissus sect are Taoist Xushui and Taoist Zhuolang. They are wearing green robes and tall crowns. The ones from Dushan sect are Qianli, Zhongjiao, Jiakong. The ones from Jishou Abbey are Taoist Zhunyin and Taoist Weiyin. I don't know the rest. The 3C beasts are of unknown origin. I only know that one of them is the Yanshui beast. It often comes to Jima Peninsula." Lu Xiaoyi compared them one by one and had a rough understanding. It wasn't easy to deal with this kind of situation when he just arrived. Killing without caring about anything was not the way to deal with it, because the reason why someone secretly attacked this external sword senior brother was probably because he wanted to provoke Xianyuan. It would be satisfying to go up and kill, but it would be a bad idea to fall into someone else's trap. He was indeed here to be a fighter, but there were different types of fighters with brains and without brains. He didn't want to be someone else's knife. He wasn't too impulsive about the death of his fellow disciples. Since he chose the orthodoxy of swordsman, he had to face life and death. How could he be so angry? In the fifth ring, such things happened every day. Lu Xiaoyi had killed many people, but he didn't see anyone coming to him. This was the awareness of a cultivator. If you didn't understand this, you couldn't survive in the cultivation world. Sooner or later, you would be provoked to death. Therefore, he encouraged this young foundation establishment to give his master a quick death. Chapter 570. Everyone had their own fate. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't the only one who had a cluster of providence. The fate cluster was something that was scattered in the universe after the collapse of the heavenly way of fate. It was something that was attached to all living beings. In fact, all living beings had their own fate. It was just that it did not appear in the form of a fate cluster. But after a person died, this invisible fate would leave the body. Most of it would return to nature, to the heavenly way, but a small part would be transferred to the person who did the harm. It would cause karma, and also cause the transfer of fate. It was also a kind of balance. Lu Xiaoyi could not see karma, but after his fate intercepting had been baptized by nature, he could vaguely identify the destination of this ownerless fate. This was what he had learned about the heavenly way of fate after he was on Whirling Star. It was very shallow and vague, but it could be used to identify the general direction. In other words, by looking at who the ownerless fate drifted to, it would show who did it. The heavenly way of fate was unfathomable. Lu Xiaoyi had the enlightenment in the peacock plume space, and he had dealt with that mysterious force many times, which allowed him to figure out some of his own things. The battle in the sky was very fierce, but the funny thing was that so far, no one had died, not even seriously injured. Only a few people had minor injuries. Those who fought were fine, but those who tried to stop the fight died. This was also a strange story. Very sad, very unwilling, want to go up and take revenge? He asked casually as he watched. He really wanted to know the fighting level of the cultivators in the Azure Sky Big World. To be honest, it was very good. Compared with the 5-ring cultivators of the same realm, they were not much weaker. Of course I am sad. Of course I am unwilling. But I don't want to go up and take revenge. I can't do it now. The ice guest answered honestly. You must be thinking that since the martial uncle of the sect is here, the responsibility of taking revenge will fall on the martial uncle's head. It's not wrong to think like this, but it's irresponsible. Your master and I are from the same sect, so of course I have the responsibility. But this responsibility is based on the interests of the sect. It doesn't involve the Taoist heart. Your master and I have never met before, and we don't have any personal feelings for each other. However, we can't compare to the time you spend with each other. Therefore, only your vengeance comes from the bottom of your heart, and it will affect your future cultivation. Therefore, don't easily push your responsibility onto others. Do you understand what I'm saying? The few foundation establishment cultivators nodded silently. There was a reason why they hadn't been selected and sent to the 5th ring. Either their aptitude and potential were obviously insufficient, or they hadn't been in the foundation establishment stage for long enough, or they had a huge flaw in their state of mind. They lacked the indomitable spirit of a swordsman. The ice guest lacked tenacity in spirit and fearlessness in momentum. In reality, he followed his master's every step and did not have his own opinions. Therefore, even if his cultivation had reached the late stage of foundation establishment, and he had a certain talent for cultivation, he was still judged as a defective product and did not have the qualification to go to the 5th ring. This was the difference between the sword vein and the Dharma vein. The sword vein valued the spirit more. If a cultivator like the ice guest was in the 3 pure ones, he would have been sent to the 5th ring long ago. It's inevitable to be sad when you lose your family and master for the first time, but you have to get over it early and think about what you can do for your master. Lu Xiaoyi usually didn't talk so much, and he even believed that actions were better than words in battle. However, he had just come to Green Sky Sect, so he needed to adapt and plan for the future. On one hand, he needed to roughly understand the level of battle here. On the other hand, he had no family in Green Sky Sect, so he was like a blind man. He needed a few pairs of eyes and ears to help him. Those who were above him couldn't fit in quickly, so he had to think about these young cultivators. It was just the right time for him to stop drinking milk. At this time, appropriate concern could easily capture people's hearts. Thank you for your concern, Uncle. I can bear it. This is not the first time I've lost my family. In fact, my previous master also passed away in battle. I was there at that time. The ice guest was very honest. He couldn't hide these things. Lu Xiaoyi laughed awkwardly. How could he have experience in this kind of thing? The ice guest's eyes were shining. He clenched his fist to show his determination. I will definitely turn my grief into strength. I will worship a good master and take revenge. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Worship again? Aren't you afraid of losing the green sky, Sword Vein? After watching for so long from the ice guest's master's intervention, to the time when he was attacked and seriously injured, to the time when he sent out the green bird's message, Lu Xiaoyi rushed over thousands of miles to help, and still managed to catch up with the end of the fight. It could be seen that the fight between cultivators of Dharma was very slow. Or maybe they didn't even want to fight to the death, but just wanted to show their strength here. On the ground, there were many foundation establishment cultivators of various sections. In the sky, there were masters of Jindan. They were fighting for the control of the future of the Jima Peninsula. They were fighting for the help of this precious land for the future of their sections. The only exception was the sea beasts of the South Sea. They were fighting for the right to trade equally with human beings. They set up a market on the Jima Peninsula, but they didn't want to occupy the Jima Peninsula. There was no precedent of sea beasts occupying a human port. Those who were not of the same race were bound to have different intentions. This kind of concept existed in the concept of human cultivators, and it was hard to change. Uncle, don't we need to stop them? Frost felt that this strange uncle was a little indecisive. The Xinyuan people were killed, but he was still watching. Shouldn't he do something to show his existence? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The way to deal with problems actually depended on one's own strength. The reason why Frost guessed Master went to stop them was that he knew that if he let them go, he couldn't control the development of the situation. However, Lu Xiaoyi could watch them fight each other, because he knew that he had the ability to change the situation when it went bad. Different strengths determined different ways of dealing with things. No one was right or wrong. What was wrong was that one's strength was not enough to deal with the trouble. No need. They are just fighting for us to see. They just want to test the attitude of Xinyuan on the Jima Peninsula. Lu Xiaoyi said very vaguely. In fact, the meaning behind his words was that Frost guest master didn't see it clearly enough. He was eager to take the responsibility, which led to a fatal disaster. The battle in the sky gradually came to an end. It was almost the end of the splendid and colorful unique techniques. They were showing their strength. This was the reality of the world of cultivation. It was to tell other competitors and also to tell Xinyuan about their abilities and attitudes. If there wasn't a result that could be accepted by all parties, there wouldn't be such a battle. Then, it would be a real life and death battle. The battle between magic cultivators was always full of a sense of ceremony. In this regard, it was far less direct than the battle between five-ring cultivators. Now, since another Xinyuan Jindan was here, there was no need to continue acting. Chapter 571. The 12 Jindan descended slowly and saluted from afar. One of them spoke apologetically. We were fighting for our own interests, but fellow Taoist Yuxing was implicated. We feel really uneasy. At that time, spells were flying everywhere and the situation was unclear. We are willing to take responsibility for the accidental injuries. Please tell us what to do. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at him. This was Taoist Wei Yin from Zhijin Temple. He had the demeanor of an immortal and had the bearing of an orthodox Taoist. Accidental injuries are common among cultivators of our generation. Without this concept, how can we be cultivators? Why don't we go back and be peacekeepers? You don't have to take it to heart. Our Xinyuan is a great sect, and we still have this bit of magnanimity. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and waved his hand. Xinyuan intends to transfer the Jima Peninsula to benefit the cultivators of the northern region. This is the truth. I came here with the authorization of my elders and have the responsibility to make a decision. I'm not here to blame you. Then, have you decided who is the winner and loser? Forgive me for my poor eyesight. I came in a hurry and did not see the truth of the matter. Why don't you say it yourself? The Jin Dan were very surprised when they heard this. Xin Yuan agreed to let the various powers fight over the Ji Ma Peninsula. This was only a preliminary intention. They were also testing Xuan Yuan's bottom line, or their preferences, or their conditions. As for Yu Xing's death, it was not a big deal in the cultivation world. Which day did not have people dying in the cultivation world. If Xian Yuan had casualties, the other sects would have even more. Shueshan, which had always been known for its ruthlessness, would never make a big fuss over the death of a disciple. They thought that this was a way to train their swordsmen. At most, the dead swordsman's friends would come to seek justice. But in this kind of chaotic battle, who would know who was the culprit? You could deal with one person, but you could not deal with an entire sect, even if the sect's strength was far inferior to Xuan Yuan's. Therefore, there was a high probability that the matter would be left unsettled. This was the reason why Yu Xing died unjustly. But now this unfamiliar Jin Dan had boasted that he could decide the ownership of the Jima Peninsula. This surprised them. They thought that this matter would take a long time, but they didn't expect Xian Yuan to be so straightforward. Fellow Taoist, may I ask for your name? Taoist Wei Yin was very cautious. Jin Dan, cultivator, wouldn't lie about such a promise in front of so many people, but he still needed to confirm it. Lu Xiaoyi was very polite. Cigarette, but for the time being, I will take over the affairs of the Jima Peninsula. Please take care of me. Xuan Yuan's rule over the northern region could not be completely carried out by Xuan Yuan's own swordsman. The swordsman was not cut out for this job. Most of them controlled the entire region through the various large and small sects scattered throughout the northern region. There was a limit to high pressure, and it was also undesirable. This was a governing philosophy that even the mortal world's imperial court could understand. It also gave the sects below them the soil to breed their ambitions. In this fertile soil, ambitions fermented. When they fermented to a certain extent and developed into practical action, they would shake the control of the upper echelons. Then there would be a bloody suppression or the overthrow of the rebels. The rule would be maintained, or another ruler would appear, and the next cycle would begin. Just like the various sects now, they were in the process of changing from ambition to practical action. More often than not, they were testing the waters. This cycle had been going on for tens of thousands of years. Just based on the time, Xuan Yuan's control was quite effective. But this could not stop the trend of cultivation history. No one could do it. The sword vein could not do it, and neither could the Dharma vein. Taoism could not do it, and neither could Buddhism. Everyone understood. Of course, they were very familiar with Xuan Yuan's seniority. The Yin generation was less than 300 years old and was considered a very young existence in Jin Dan. They did not know why Xian Yuan had sent such a young man to handle this matter. They had the confidence to cause trouble. Firstly, they felt that they were not at a disadvantage when compared to Xian Yuan and Jin Dan. Secondly, they had control over the surrounding territories of the Jima Peninsula. In their opinion, why would Xian Yuan need to deploy a large number of people from the Fifth Ring to a place as small as the Jima Peninsula? The Jin Dan crowd felt that this was a little sudden. Since when did they have a clear winner and loser? They were purely acting here, and conveniently killed a rash swordsman who had obstructed them. This time, it was Chu Shui from the Narcissus sect who spoke. The strength of our sects is similar, and it is difficult to determine who is better. I wonder who is more suitable in the eyes of Xuan Yuan's superior. This was also a test. These sects were not fools. There was no reason for them to fight to the death before Xian Yuan announced the rules. The last one who won miserably might not even satisfy Xian Yuan. They needed a clear rule that they could follow. In the northern domain, Xian Yuan could not make detailed rules because the place was too big. They could not control every mountain and every city. However, the Jima Peninsula was different. It was small enough. To put it bluntly, it was the site of the old mountain gate of the Surging Waves Pavilion. People were interested in it because of the unspeakable things that had been proven by the surging waves pavilion for tens of thousands of years. The location of the mountain gate was very important, and it could not be chosen casually. Lu Xiaoyi was also in a difficult position. The four forces were all around the Jima Peninsula. One of them was on the sea, and the other three were on the land. They surrounded the Jima Peninsula so tightly that even a needle could not be inserted and water could not be splashed in. It was also impossible to lead other forces in. If he really wanted to find them, he would definitely be resisted by the four forces. Because of the terrain, he could only choose between the four forces. Thus, he muttered, "Everyone's Tao skills are profound, and your foundations are profound. Each of you has your own advantages. I am also in a difficult position. Since this is a matter of the cultivation world, of course, strength is the most important thing. I can see that everyone's Tao skills are profound and unfathomable. As a person from the sword vein, I can only watch the show. In fact, I don't know much about the wonders of it. How about this? In order to accurately measure everyone's strength, why don't I use my sword, and everyone can try to receive it? The difference in strength will be known when the sword is used. This is also a first-hand measure. In the end, the Jima Peninsula will belong to whoever performs the best under the sword attack. What do you think?" The Jean Dan crowd laughed. They were all old foxes who had lived for hundreds of years. How could they not know the true meaning of this swordsman's words? Although it was said to measure the difference in strength with one sword, the true meaning behind it was nothing more than to find out who killed Yuxing. Did he think they were fools? But they still wouldn't refuse because they had their own strength. How could they let someone test their strength with one sword attack? With Su On Yuan's ability to use external swords, even if he used 10 or 100 swords, he wouldn't be able to find out anything. Because Yuxing's death wasn't the work of one person, but of 3. How could they test it? Moreover, this cigarette but had arrogantly said that he would decide who would belong to him after the test. They wanted to see who he would choose after the test. If he didn't choose well, it would be a group attack. The Lone Mountain sect's had horns, eyes flashed fiercely. "Fellow Taoist, are you serious? You aren't here to make fun of us, are you?" Lu Xiaoyi sighed. "What right does this cigarette but have to dare to make fun of you swordsmen? Firstly, it's a conclusion. Secondly, it's a test to see how far I can go after practicing the sword for hundreds of years. If I accidentally hurt you, please forgive me." Everyone's divine senses intertwined, and they all agreed. In that case, we would like to experience Su On Yuan's invincible swordsmanship. Chapter 572. Every cultivator had their own rules when it came to fights of magical powers. The basis of the fights were their realms, their roots, their cultivation, and their special techniques. The trial that Lu Xiaoyi proposed was the most peaceful and friendly one. He would attack with his sword while the rest would defend themselves. They would see how they performed in defense, and see who was more relaxed, who could break through the formless, and who could be more indifferent. There was no fixed scale for the differences. It was completely up to Lu Xiaoyi to decide. It sounded unreliable, but that was exactly what everyone wanted. It would give them more opportunities to question and cause trouble. Up until now, they still did not believe that this young Xianyuan swordsman could decide the ownership of Jima Peninsula. Therefore, even if he was fair, there were countless ways to refute such a method. The sea beasts from the South Sea were the most impatient. They did not like to wait and preferred to fight head-on. The Loachwater beast was the first to jump out and shouted, "Let's decide the sword. We the sea beasts will go first." They straightened their bodies and stood a few hundred feet away. This was the lowest shooting range of Xuan Yuan's external sword in their understanding. They stood there for 2 reasons. First, they were confident in their own strength. Second, they were disdainful of Xuan Yuan's external sword. They respected Xianyuan, but this did not include the middle and low-level swordsmen from Mount Shao. Even the most ignorant cultivator knew that the true elites of Xianyuan were in the 5th ring. Those who stayed in Mount Shao were all losers who did not want to improve themselves. They were not worth mentioning. In the eyes of the sects in the Azure Sky Great World, They had a deep understanding of the strength of the disciples of the top sections. Of course, they could not be compared to the elites of the other sections. However, they were not weak compared to the swordsmen who stayed behind. Moreover, this was a young man who was not even 300 years old. How long could he have formed his Aura's core? His cultivation was clearly there. What was there to be afraid of? Lu Xiaoyi's expression was solemn. He was very cautious. He circulated his qi 3 times, and his qi filled his 5 meridians. This preparation made the Jindan laugh in their hearts. Was he going to use all his strength? Lu Xiaoyi gestured with his hands and shouted, "Sword, come!" His shout was loud and clear, and his sword was bold and powerful. Following the direction of his finger, a flying sword flew out of its case and disappeared, its brilliant radiance flourishing. The Lust Water God spoke disdainfully, but in his heart, he was still fearful of Xuanyuan's reputation. Although they were causing trouble here, they were all prepared to flee at the first sign of trouble. If Xuanyuan was serious, how could he be any better than them? Instantly, its body expanded several times, and it revealed its true form of the loathsome beast. It wielded an incomparably gigantic pitch-black bone axe and slashed towards the flying sword. In his opinion, with the bone axe in front of him, coupled with his own valiant body, no matter how sharp the flying sword was, it would at most cause a small wound. It wouldn't be able to do anything to it. It had the pure thought of a sea beast. It knew that there were only 3 parties fighting for the Jima Peninsula, and they were only here to make up the numbers. Therefore, it didn't care how good its defense looked. It only wanted to test the power of the swordsman's sword. The swordsman wanted to test it, and it also wanted to know how powerful the Xuanyuan swordsman was. The huge axe swung out and clashed with the flying sword. Zhong Jiao felt his arms tremble slightly. It was impressive that such a small flying sword could cause his arms to tremble slightly when it clashed with his huge bone axe. But that was it. The flying sword was bounced far away and quickly returned. This attack didn't hurt it at all. The Lust Water God laughed loudly and was very pleased. But after being in the human world for so long, it still knew how to speak. Especially when it was in a good mood, it never lacked manners. The power of Xuanyuan's flying sword has opened my eyes. Good sword, good sword. Lu Xiaoyi returned the favor. South Sea Daoist friend, you were born with divine strength. Seeing you in person is far better than hearing about you. Lu Xiaoyi's attack calmed the hearts of the Jindan. His strength was above Yuxing, but there was a limit to it. It was rare for someone his age. It was no wonder that Xuanyuan would send him. It seemed like he was also a small elite. But that was it. In their eyes, this kind of sword technique was far from enough to deal with them. If it was coupled with his rich battle experience, this swordsman was just so. Next was the sea beasts. Their impatient tempers were the same, but perhaps they were doing it on purpose to express something? The antlerfish and the cuttlefish came up one after another. But with the experience of the lust water beast before, their strength was originally similar. How difficult was it to block the flying sword? On the contrary, because of the experience gained, it became easier to deal with them. After the sea beasts settled their swords, it was time to talk about the human cultivators. Compared to the sea beasts, they were much more hypocritical. Because they knew the strength of this swordsman, everyone was very relaxed. But to humans, they always subconsciously wanted to put themselves last, to plan before acting. After this round of wrangling, the body cultivators could not win against the Dharma cultivators. They were not as thick-skinned as them, nor were they as eloquent as them. Finally, it was Zhong Jiao who stood out. Then, let us, the Lone Mountain sect, experience the sword technique of Xuanyuan's disciple. Zhong Jiao led the way and stood where the sea beasts once stood. In the cultivation world, humans were stronger than demons at the same level. Even demons dare to stand so close to them. How could humans be inferior? Although he knew that the flying sword could not hurt him, Zhong Jiao's defense was not weak. This was the self-restraint of an outstanding cultivator. He would not put himself in danger just because he underestimated his opponent. even if he was facing an opponent who was not as good as himself. The flying sword followed him. Zhong Jiao exhaled, and a series of vacuum explosions appeared on the flying sword's trajectory. This was Zhong Jiao's supernatural power, Space Speed Trap. It used a series of small space collapses to block the opponent's attack, causing the opponent's attack to continuously enter and exit space to consume energy. It was especially effective against physical attacks. Because it was like a child blowing out soap bubbles, some people made fun of this supernatural power and called it bubble dragons. Zhong Jiao's strength was indeed impressive. His supernatural power was also very effective. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword did not even pass through all the bubble dragons before it had to be recalled due to lack of energy. If this continued, the flying sword would probably lose control. Zhong Jiao did not say anything and retreated back into the crowd. The hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators from various sects cheered unconsciously. The ice guest and a few other Xinyuan swordsmen felt a little embarrassed. Although there was no clear winner, the things contained within made them feel very awkward. Ice Frost had a straightforward temper and said softly, "Instead of being humiliated like this, why don't we fight with all our might like Senior Uncle Yu Xing?" The glory of Xinyuan was not here. They were just using brats to show off. Next was Jia Kong. He did not have the same temper as his senior, Zhong Jiao. Facing such an opponent, there was no need to use his Dharma power. Even if he was being careful, he did not need to be so cautious. He did not use his Dharma power and stood proudly. He looked at his opponent and raised his hand in invitation. It was still the same flying sword. It was still the same speed. It was still overflowing with brilliance. It was flashy but not practical. Jia Kang's defensive supernatural power was the art of horn. It was the materialization of the horn on his forehead, forming a sharp horn. It was shaped like a Dawu, but it was much longer than a Dawu's horn. It extended to a length of 1,000 feet. Even a small mountain would be penetrated by his sharp horn. It was actually a supernatural power that was both offensive and defensive. The horn was very mysterious. Even a sharp object the size of a needle tip could not escape from it. Just like this time, the tip of the horn accurately found the tip of the sword. In terms of size, it was like the tip of a needle against the corner of a Dawu. Was there any need to say the result? Chapter 573. When the two swords collided, Jia Kong immediately felt that something was wrong. It was as if a steel needle was drilling straight into his body. Even with the hardness of his skin, he was completely unable to resist the speed of the flying sword. It was as if the sword was not drilling into his skin, but into his tofu. He knew that this was because the flying sword itself contained an extremely powerful force. He could not understand why the flying sword was like a silver spear to others, but to him, it was like a diamond. He only knew that if he did not retract his horn, his divine ability would be wasted. At this point, he still did not realize that his life was about to end. He immediately gave up on his divine ability and retracted his horn, intending to use another divine ability to resist. How could he have known that the flying sword would follow him like a shadow, following the retraction of his horn? What was 1,000 feet to a flying sword? It was basically the final distance that had been decided. How could he possibly react to it? At this moment, Jia Kong seemed to have woken up from a dream. How could he activate his Dharma idol again? As soon as the sword entered his body, the sword aura immediately exploded. The tyrannical sword aura tore Jia Kang's body into pieces, leaving not a single piece of flesh intact. This sudden change made everyone present, not only the hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators below, but also the dozens of Jin Dan in the sky, completely unable to react. When the director saw the retraction of his horn, he knew that it was not good, but he only had time to shout, "Junior brother!" As the blood scattered, Lu Xiaoyi also turned pale with fright, hurriedly saying, "Accidental injury. Accidental injury. How could this be? Why did this fellow Taoist retract his horn? I didn't even have time to retract my flying sword." Qianli was furious. He did it on purpose. He was about to rush out, but the director pulled him back. The situation had taken a turn for the worse. As the senior brother, the director had to be responsible for the actions of the three of them. The current Su on Yuan may indeed be in the middle to low level, with limited strength, but this was not the truth. It was the tiger taking a nap. If all of their actions followed the rules, then this tiger would not have woken up. But once they stepped out of line, even the large Lone Mountain sect would not be enough for him to swallow. Jia Kong stared at Qian Li's shoulder, dead in his eyes. The director's voice was like a nail, piercing into the depths of his junior brother's mind. It's your turn next. Remember your duty. Only take one strike from him. Just one sword strike. I won't allow you to do anything else. Think about the sect. Think about master and mistress. Think of our home. You can't ruin everything because of a moment of anger. We are cultivators. Life and death were normal. That includes you and me. But we can't drag the sect down. Under the strong suppression of the main horn, Qianli was a Jin Dan cultivator after all. He had a tenacious heart and knew what was right and wrong. Qianli quickly regained his senses and nodded his head. He did not say anything and leapt into the air. He moved several hundred feet forward from the original distance. It was as if this was the only way to vent the pent-up frustrations in his heart. Glaring angrily, the Dharma idol rapidly transformed into its strongest form. The huge Dharma idol was like a fire, overflowing with violent energy. This was a clear indication of the cultivator's uncontrollable anger. At the same time, flames flickered in Qian Li's eyes. This was his best technique, the angry diamond. Some of the Jin Dan cultivators were worried that Qian Li would not be able to control his emotions and sent a message to the director to ask. The director shook his head firmly. He believed in his brother. Under Qian Fang's manic appearance, he was actually meticulously calculating. His current form was the strongest glaring diamond form. This was to defend against the sword cultivator's unfathomable sword. If the swordsman had the intention to harm him, as long as he dared to make a second strike, this form would guarantee that he would immediately switch from defense to offense. At that time, if the swordsman broke the rules first, he could not blame his brother for being ruthless. Qian Li had another question to consider. It was a crucial question. He was very clear in his heart. In the process of this chaotic battle, the swordsman's death was the work of three people working together to show that they would face difficulties together. One of them was Jia Kong from the Lone Mountain sect. Then, what happened just now, was it a coincidence? Or was it intentional? From the analysis of the sword, there was nothing special about the swordsman's strike. It was exactly the same as the previous flying sword. However, there was a problem with his junior brother Jia Kang's response. He should not have retracted his Fang. That was the reason for his failure and death. The sword's momentum was normal, but it drilled into the corner. Was this some kind of special secret technique? He could not tell. The swordsman's strength? The swordsman's goal? Everything had become confusing. He needed to find the truth in the next strike. Was this an accidental mistake? Or was it a deliberate murder? The flying sword was still the same as before. It was neither stronger nor weaker. The swordsman was still struggling, as if he was drinking milk. Qian Li had not even crossed half of the distance of a few hundred feet. The anger in his eyes was almost tangible. It burned the flying sword and turned it into a burning sword. The swordsman was also in a difficult situation. He was probably worried that his flying sword would be damaged. Before Qian Li could reach him, he hurriedly retracted his attack and called his flying sword back. However, the anger in his eyes did not stop. It was only when the flying sword was less than 100 feet away from its master that he retracted the anger in his eyes. His defense this time was undoubtedly the best among all of them. It prevented the swordsman's flying sword from getting close to him. Qian Li received the sword, but he was still angry. He wanted more, but he couldn't fight back. So he opened his mouth, and the huge Dharma form spat out a mouthful of saliva. It was the size of a wash basin when it landed on the sword cultivator's body. Everyone was shocked. They were afraid that the swordsman would use this opportunity to cause trouble. However, they did not expect the swordsman to be so calm. Seeing the swordsman caressing his flying sword with a pained expression, everyone's suspicion of him weakened. Could it be that it was just an accident? Was it just an accident? Cultivators must be careful. However, they must not be overly cautious. It was easy to say what was appropriate, but when it really came down to it, there was no way to make a decision. Next up were the 3 cultivators from Jijin Temple. Zhen Yin looked at senior brother Wei Yin and said softly, "I'll go first, then junior brother Wei Yin. How about senior brother go last?" Among the 3 of them, the one who attacked Yoshing was senior brother Wei Yin. Wei Yin was not pretentious. "That's good. I want to see what this swordsman has up his sleeves. Is he pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger?" Zhen Yin and Wei Yin rose into the air one after the other. They were very cautious and used all kinds of defensive methods. They did not underestimate the swordsman just because he ran into a wall in front of Qian Li. It was as if they were facing their greatest enemy. They were very clear that if they encountered a true elite swordsman from Xianyuan, no amount of caution would be superfluous. However, the power of the flying sword did not exceed the scope of normal. It was perfectly blocked by their defenses and was extremely easy. It was as if the attack against Jia Kong was purely a coincidence. Zhen Yin and Wei Yin came to Wei Yan's side, their expressions full of worry. Wei Yin, on the other hand, gave a relaxed smile. "I don't believe in coincidences. I've never believed in coincidences. Coincidence wouldn't allow that sword to kill Jia Kong, who had attacked Excellence Hang. There must be something we don't know, even if we did it secretly without leaving any traces. What does that matter? Even if this swordsman came for revenge, does he have the ability to kill me with one sword? As long as I'm not as careless as Jia Kong, it's just one sword. I'll just treat it as a life and death battle with an opponent. In Qin Kong, the number of cultivators who can kill me with one strike can be counted on one hand, and that does not include this person. So why worry? Act like that woman." Chapter 574. Wei Yan's mentality was actually the mentality of most of the Jin Dan cultivators. They were not childish people, and they all knew that there was something fishy going on, but no one would believe that they could not block this swordsman's sword with all their might. Other than that idiot Jia Kong, they did not even activate their Dharma powers and fell for this swordsman's sinister move. The answer to all the mysteries lay in Wei Yan's sword. The few Xianyuan Foundation establishment swordsmen below were getting more and more confused as they watched. It was a little embarrassing to call him Uncle Master, but he had also killed one of them. It didn't seem right to say that Martial Uncle was invincible. Most of the time, his sword was like scratching an itch for others. Bing Shuang asked, "What do you think will be the result of Uncle Master's sword this time?" No one could answer. This was already beyond their capabilities. They did not have an accurate understanding of the abilities of those Jin Dan cultivators in the sky, so they could only make wild guesses. Bing Ku, on the other hand, had some intuition. Could it be that Uncle Master killed the person who attacked Master? If they were involved in the attack, Uncle Master would kill them. If they were not, would he let them go? A few of them felt that this was very possible, but the problem was that they did not know who was the one who harmed Excellent Xing. At that time, the sky was filled with the radiance of spells. How could they distinguish clearly? Bingka looked forward to it. I don't know if this Uncle Master has a disciple. I think, beside him, Bing Shuang covered his mouth. Senior brother, ancestor, can't you stop adding to the mess? According to your way of apprenticeship, sooner or later, all the outstanding seniors in Xianyuan will be killed by you. Bingku was very dissatisfied. I am the Bingku sword. Am I so unlucky? Wei Yin slowly rose into the sky. He was relaxed, and his defenses were activated. Spiritual weapons circled around him, and a soul essence beast was lying on top of his head. He was really treating this sword as a matter of life and death. The swordsman's flying sword was very strange. Its power was average, but it could be used in various mysterious ways. This was the reason why he used his great powers to maintain the soul essence beast. With this soul essence beast, he could ensure that he would not be harmed by any mysterious forces. The swordsman pointed his finger again. This was a necessary action before he attacked. Everyone had seen through it and remembered it in their hearts. The flying sword flew out. It seemed a little different. It was no longer dazzling, nor was it whistling through the air. Instead, it drew a graceful arc through the air. City Jew plus God. Lu Xiaoyi did not hold back in this attack. When the spell cultivator was defending with all his might, he had to go all out if he wanted to achieve his goal with his insufficient cultivation. At least, he could not hold on his single sword attack. The swordsman's sword this was power. It was extremely threatening, and it had already reached the great accomplishment stage. Only the most outstanding swordsman could possess such a perfect aura. This guy had really been pretending to be a pig, to eat a tiger. Of course, he immediately realized that he had made a mistake in maintaining the soul essence beast with his great magic power. The swordsman did not have any tricks up his sleeves. He killed Jia Kong with his invincible power. He was a decisive person. He immediately removed the soul essence beast and turned to increase his physical defense. The situation was a bit urgent. The distance was too close, and his reaction time was very limited. It might not be enough to mobilize all of his physical defense, but it wouldn't be too far off. He just needed another 2 or 3 breaths of time. But he did not get the time he expected. The flying sword had only flown a few hundred feet when the sound of thunder was heard. The front of the flying sword emitted a white shockwave. This meant that the flying sword had broken through some kind of speed limit and was still accelerating. Zhen Yin was shocked. He screamed, "Senior dodge!" At this moment, he did not care about the rules. In front of his life, any reaction was reasonable and necessary. But his voice was not as fast as the flying sword. Sword chi thunderous sound. Lu Xiaoyi was now able to achieve this speed on any flying sword. This was also the second realm he had reached in the Sword Dao realm. Wei Yin did not even have a breath time to react. The wrong position gave him no time to react to the flying sword's speed. His defense was broken like paper. His spirit weapons either missed or were sent flying. There was a big problem with his defense system. The collision-type spirit weapons could not keep up with the flying sword's speed. He should have used the most clumsy shield-type spirit weapon. That would have been the best choice. But now, it was too late to say anything. The flying sword plunged in, completely unreasonable. Then, the sky was filled with blood that was as bright as Jia Kang's. The scene was dead silent. Everyone seemed to have realized something. Lu Xiaoyi did not pretend to be young anymore. He only smiled indifferently. His gaze swept across the Jin Dan in front of him. He asked, "You say, is this an accidental injury?" His sharp eyes made people unable to look at him directly. This is not an accidental injury. This is a blatant, conscious, and purposeful killing, just like what you did to Senior Yuxing. So, whether it is an accidental injury or not, it is all fair, isn't it? Of course it was fair. If it was an accidental injury, then everyone was an accidental injury. There was no need to talk about who was to blame. If it was not an accidental injury, then it was revenge under karma. A life for a life, a debt must be paid. It was righteous. Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword returned to its sheath. He pointed with his finger. "Aye, cigarette butt. Am from the 5th ring. Narcissus sect? It's your turn. There is no reason for everyone to be here, but you guys are the only ones who are not involved." Lu Xiaoyi did not want to keep hiding. His sudden appearance could not be hidden at all. At this moment, when Xin Yuan finally revealed his sharp fangs under 10,000 years of tyranny, no one thought of fighting. The matter was obvious. Xin Yuan had called back the 5th ring elites. How many had come? No idea. What did he want to achieve? No idea. Was he going to cause a storm of blood? They still did not know. If they did not know anything, then what was the point of fighting? The main problem now was how to send this news back to the sect so that they could make the most appropriate response. Taoist Xiu Shui bitterly waved his hand. Narcissus sect will withdraw from the battle of the Ji Ma Peninsula. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Withdraw just because you say so? What you did could be written off just because you withdrew. Whoever did it, step forward. I will give you a fair chance to fight. Xiu Shui was about to speak when Zhuo Lang stopped his senior brother. He took a step forward and laughed loudly. I did it. It has nothing to do with the sect. I have long heard that the fifth ring Xinyuan swordsman is the champion of battle. Today I, Zhuo Lang, am honored to experience it. Ignoring his senior brother's advice, he leaped forward, fearlessly approaching the swordsman. Xiu Shui's face was full of tears. He knew that his junior brother wanted to use his death to wash away Xuanyuan's hatred. His junior brother did what he had to do, and, as his senior brother, he had to do what he had to do. That was to not interfere. Otherwise, it would become the sect's action. If Jin Tianguan's Zhen Yin Hui Yin could do it, and Lone Mountain Sect's chief Jiao Qianli could do it, then why couldn't his Narcissus sect? Chapter 575. The Narcissus sect and the Surging Waves Pavilion behind them had a similar orthodoxy. They were both proficient in the power of water. The ability to control water was a technique that focused on short to medium-range attacks. The longer the distance from the opponent, the less surprise it would have. When facing a long-range opponent like the swordsman, it would be easy for them to be beaten up. Therefore, Zhuo Lang's forward charge was not only because he didn't want to drag the Narcissus sect disciples into it, but also because he wanted to display the characteristics of his own technique. He was already prepared to die. If he was targeted by the reinforcement from Xuanyuan's fifth ring, there would be no guarantee of his sect's safety in the northern region in the future. He might as well take a gamble today and let everyone see the true level of this swordsman's strength. It would also allow them to formulate a corresponding strategy for the future. Although it was a mid-sized sect, the decisiveness of the cultivators in the sect was still praised. In Azure Sky, the cultivators' abilities were not inferior just because they didn't have the complicated competitive environment of the fifth ring. In the entire process of setting the swords, this was the only time they truly engaged in close combat. It was no longer a passive defense, but an active attack. Only then could they truly measure the difference in strength. Even if you're an elite from the fifth ring, you can't rely on your reputation alone to suppress the Jin Dan of Azure Sky. The change was abnormally sudden. Zhuo Lang's attack was without a trace, and so were the flying swords. How could Lu Xiaoyi stop his series of suppression just because he praised his character in the last round? The second strike was unnecessary. He had to kill him in one strike to achieve the effect of killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. Only then could he avoid more trouble and more killings in the future. Lu Xiaoyi had been in the Dao for many years. He deeply understood the principle of using killing to stop killing. Now was not the time to be soft-hearted. 7 flying swords instantly flew out of their sheaths and circled around, forming a sword formation. Before Zhuo Lang's water elemental technique could take shape, the 7 flying swords trembled together. One of them swooped down with the power to destroy the heavens and earth. The sky regained its tranquility, as if nothing had ever happened. All that was left was a group of core formation cultivators standing silently for a long time, and the foundation establishment cultivators below who were absolutely silent. Xuanyuan's ferocious might had wreaked havoc in this region 10,000 years ago, but it had been a long time, and humans were a forgetful race. When the ferocious might reappeared, everything seemed so unreal. In fact, it was just a reenactment of history. Lu Xiaoyi said calmly, I said that I would decide the ownership of the Jima Peninsula with the sword, and I meant what I said. Therefore, from today onwards, Jima Peninsula will be under the control of the South Seas beasts. Later on, Xinyuan will send people to contact you and discuss the amount of supply, as well as each other's rights and obligations. Does anyone have any objections to my decision? None of the cultivators from Chronicle Temple, Narcissus Sect, and Lone Mountain Sect spoke. Silence meant silence. There was nothing to be suspicious about. The 3 sea beasts shook their hands and flew into the air. What kind of joke was this? Who would dare to enter the Ji-Ma Peninsula at this time? With Xianyuan the tiger's ferocious might, and the three human forces' unwillingness to cooperate, even if they took down a peninsula all by themselves, they wouldn't be able to produce much, and the sea beasts weren't good at business either. What could they offer as tribute to the tiger that had his appetite aroused? They might even have to pay for the South Sea's treasures. And when they fought, they would have to pay with the lives of the beasts. The lives of the sea beasts were also their lives. The Jindan cultivators felt bitter. Their acting had been very successful, but they had messed up the ending. They had tried to steal a chicken only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. They had long since lost their ambitions. So how could they be in the mood to stay and chat with others? They couldn't help but leave. The two from Lone Mountain sect also followed the crowd, but they were stopped by a calm voice. I remember someone spitting at me just now. Is this the courtesy of Lone Mountain sect? Zhong Jiao stopped abruptly and turned around. Lone Mountain may be a body vein, but it is a human of the Azure Sky sect. It also knows etiquette. With a wave of his hand, he knocked out the glaring Qianli. Using his Dharma idol, he opened his huge mouth and inhaled deeply. Qianli's saliva, which was as big as a wash basin, was sucked into his mouth along with the surrounding soil. He even chewed and licked his lips. He apologized again. This guy never rinses his mouth. How disgusting. The ground is already clean. Does fellow Yin have any other instructions? Lu Xiaoyi's expression did not change. You are indeed a human of the human race. You know when to advance and when to retreat. I do not have any other requests. I just want to remind you that when the ground is clean, it is difficult to calm your heart. Take care of yourself. The Jindan cultivators in all directions disappeared without a trace. The hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators below also dispersed. They came with a bang and left in a hurry. Bing Ku and a few other Foundation establishment swordsmen stood upright, waiting for their Uncle Master's instructions to teach them a lesson. They had heard too much about the grandeur of the Five Rings and the power struggle of the swordsmen. But these were all too far away from them. How could they experience it personally? Cultivators respected strength. This was the first basic understanding of cultivators after they entered the Tao. But only today did they understand the deeper meaning of this. Strength was prestige. The process. The result. It didn't matter if it was reasonable or not. It didn't matter if you were crafty. Swordsmen were nothing without strength. Even ordinary cultivators with Dharma meridians could play them in the palm of their hands. They did not feel this when they followed Yu Hang. They were used to compromising. But after following Uncle Master Yin for just an hour, their long-extinguished spirit was reignited. A cultivator's life should be like Uncle Master Yin. Only then could they live up to their Tao. Otherwise, how different would they be from insects? Lu Xiaoyi hovered in the air. After the hustle and bustle dissipated, what was left was a sense of emptiness. There were many talents in Qin Kong. Even these few medium-sized sects were all outstanding people. Although they pretended to be arrogant, there was not a trace of satisfaction after they had succeeded. The record-keeper temple's shrewd self-discipline, the Narcissus sect's hot-blooded fearlessness, and the Lone Mountain sect's humiliation were all reminding him that things were far from over. He had only temporarily resolved this crisis, but he still knew nothing about the truth behind the matter. More importantly, such a high-pressure method could not be repeated. If he did it a few more times, he would not be solving the problem for Lone Mountain, but increasing the number of potential enemies for Xianyuan. He knew the pros and cons of this, but he still had no idea how to continue. He looked at the few young swordsmen below and sighed. Follow me back to the mountain. Bing Ku was the eldest senior brother. He was hesitant. Uncle Master, we were ordered to patrol the Ji-Ma Peninsula. Returning to the mountain without permission, Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. Senior brother Yu Hang died in battle. This mission is canceled. Don't worry about it. He led the way, and the few behind him hurriedly followed. They were in a neat formation, like a flock of ducklings following behind an old mother duck. Although this matter was over, there would definitely be a reaction from the lower-level cultivators. What was the use of these few Foundation establishment swordsmen staying here? It would be a loss for nothing if they were killed off because of a grudge. He could handle the Jin Dan level for the time being, but who could handle the Foundation establishment level? The problem with Qin Kong and Xuanyuan Swordvein was a problem with the system. It was not something he could solve alone. It was really troublesome. Chapter 576. They directly teleported back to Shao Mountain. As for the aftermath of the Jima Peninsula, they could only leave it to Xuanyuan spies. Lu Xiaoyi might not be able to solve the problem once and for all, but it wouldn't be a problem to keep the situation under control for a few days. He ordered the Foundation building cultivators to return to their cave residences and wait for further arrangements. However, he didn't rush to report. Instead, he hovered in the air and circled around Shao Mountain several times. Compared to the dome, the mountains and rivers here weren't inferior at all. The only drawback was that the atmosphere here was a bit low. It was far less lively than the domed sky, where sword lights crisscrossed the sky and exuded a vigorous vitality. If a cultivation group didn't have this kind of vitality, it would be very detrimental to the growth of cultivators. Everyone wanted to compete, and so did cultivators. An environment of competition was very important. However, he wasn't one of Xuanyuan's higher-ups, so he didn't have the right to make irresponsible remarks about the sect considerations. Perhaps the higher-ups had a more profound intention. His view was still too shallow, so he wouldn't show any doubts in these aspects. It wasn't his duty. What he admired the most was the flying peak. It slowly rotated around Shao Mountain according to a certain pattern. This was the place where the Supremes and perfected masters cultivated. He was qualified to go there, but he didn't have the strength to cultivate for a long time. After a while, he went to the Thousand Elegance Peak. Just like the Fifth Ring, there wasn't much difference between the peaks here. In other words, the Fifth Ring's domed sky was copied here. He didn't think it was necessary. Wasn't it better to have different names? Shao Mountain was Shao Mountain, and the domed sky was the domed sky. They could never replace each other. When he arrived at the Sword Aura Rushing Heaven Pavilion, he had the same feeling. There were too few cultivators here, so it seemed a bit cold and cheerless. Seeing that he was unfamiliar, an old Jin Dan greeted him. Fellow Taoist, Lu Xiaoyi was very reasonable. He knew he came in a hurry, so he was a stranger here. Cigarette, but yesterday, I came from the Fifth Ring and was sent to the South Sea by Master Xiang. Now that I'm back, who should I look for? Or Master Xiang? The Taoist suddenly realized and complained. So it's Junior Marshal Brother Yin. I'm Gu Ting. You're on the roster. I was wondering why I couldn't see you. I thought you went sightseeing. Don't take it to heart. That's just how Sage Xiang is. He doesn't have a plan to use whoever he catches. We're already used to it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Junior brother, I'm new here, so I'm not familiar with the people here. I'm not familiar with the rules and procedures of our sect. Please give me some pointers, senior brother. If I make any mistakes, please forgive me. Gu Ting laughed. Junior brother is too polite. You're young and promising, and you came here with a mission. You're a bit different from us, who are just waiting to die. I'll guide junior apprentice brother on how to settle down. Actually, the rules aren't too different from the Dome. We'll talk about that later. Since junior apprentice brother has completed the mission, you should report back as soon as possible and see what arrangements the Uncle Masters have for you. I'll take you there. If you're like this, you should go directly to Marshal Uncle Nan, who is in charge of Soaring Heaven Pavilion's daily affairs. He's the one in charge, so he has full authority over Qin Kong's matters. Lu Xiaoyi followed him around the Heaven Charge Pavilion. Senior Marshal brother, don't we need to go back to Marshal Uncle Xiang? Gu Ting shook his head and smiled bitterly. Marshal Uncle Xiang left Qin Kong early this morning and went to the void to gather spiritual opportunity. Where can we find him? Junior apprentice brother, our Shao Mountain is different from the Dome. The Dome is a true pyramid structure. Here, it's a complete mess. There aren't much more enlightened masters than true monarchs. That's why the Uncle Masters are all secretive dragons. It's hard to meet them. If you have any problems in the future, you can go directly to Marshal Uncle Nan. He's in charge of Soaring Heaven Pavilion, so he won't leave easily. Lu Xiaoyi nodded and thanked him. Soon, they arrived at a side hall. It was very quiet and simple. Gu Ting instructed, "You can go in. I want to accompany you. When you're done, come find me. I'll show junior apprentice brother the beautiful scenery of Shao Mountain. At the same time, I'll arrange a cave for junior apprentice brother." Inside the side hall, a Taoist was closing his eyes and concentrating. He wasn't cultivating. There was a pile of jade slips by his feet. Obviously, they were all news from the various provinces of Qing Kong. After being selected by Jin Dan, they were here to make a summary. As a Yuaning enlightened master, it was a bit of a waste to do these things. However, someone had to do it. This kind of leadership couldn't be completely thrown to Jin Dan. Jin Dan's level of foresight and the direction of the sect's overall strategy was still lacking. This was a middle-aged cultivator. His face was dignified and slightly serious. "The tea is on the table. The wine is in the cabinet. Take it yourself. I want to look at a few more jade slips." "Wait a moment." Lu Xiaoyi bowed deeply. He didn't take any of the things he said. He just sat down cross-legged and waited silently. Since Martial Uncle Nan said so, the time wouldn't be short. He just had to wait. After a few moments, Martial Uncle Nan put down the jade slips and looked at him. "You don't drink? This is rare among swordsmen. The wine I have here has a good background. Ordinary people don't have the chance to drink it." Lu Xiaoyi said seriously, "I drink, but it depends on my mood. Today I came here to learn from Martial Uncle Nan. It's better not to drink." Martial Uncle Nan nodded. Drinking or not drinking wouldn't affect a cultivator's mind. Therefore, drinking wouldn't cause problems. Everyone had their own habits, so it wasn't good to force them. According to the information from the Fifth Ring, this cigarette, but was a true elite of the external sword sect in the Dome Peak. It was said that when he was in the Zhuji phase, he even crushed the internal sword sect. He was very amazing. He was one of the few Yuaning in the Xianyuan sword sect who didn't go to the Fifth Ring. He was born and raised here and served Xianyuan all his life. He had never thought of going to the Fifth Ring to further his studies. For him, his real roots and real studies should be in Qing Kong, in Shao Mountain. What was the Dome Peak? There were a few people with this mentality in Qing Kong. They were the most old-fashioned of the local sections. It was because of them that Shao Mountain's cultivators managed to survive these years, even though they were a little nervous. He didn't agree with transferring people from the Fifth Ring. What couldn't Shao Mountain solve by itself? This was the pride of the people of Qing Kong. Even if a large number of talents were sent to the Fifth Ring, they could still maintain the dignity of Shao Mountain. This cigarette, but didn't seem to be as lazy and slippery as the message said. Instead, he was a very well-behaved person. I don't know how the other side transmitted the message. Or this guy's current appearance is just an act. The reason why he wanted to read the jade slip first was that there was a piece of information from the South Sea. It had a detailed introduction of the dispute over the Jima Peninsula, which made him a little curious. It wasn't because this cigarette, but was very strong. It was normal for an elite swordsman from the Fifth Ring to have outstanding swordsmanship, because all the talents were there. What he was curious about was that this guy actually gave the Jima Peninsula to the sea beasts of the South Sea. This didn't conform to Shao Mountain's plan for the future of the South Sea. Chapter 577. When Perfected Xiang gave Lu Xiaoyi the task, he did say that he would be free to do as he pleased in the South Sea. This was also Xuan Yuan style. While his disciples were outside, he would try his best not to restrict them. However, this did not mean that a single Jin Dan could decide the ownership of a peninsula. This might be due to the difference in the way Qing Kong and Wu Huan did things. Wu Huan was more bold, while Qing Kong was more disciplined. However, he did not intend to deny this decision, because he knew very well that doing so would create a huge psychological barrier for the cultivators below. It would cause them to be timid, or even deliberately push back. This was not something he wanted to see. "Why did you choose the Sea Beast clan? I thought you would choose the Narcissus sect." Lu Xiaoyi said respectfully, "The Narcissus sect is backed by the Surging Waves Pavilion. 10,000 years ago, they were in the North region and in the East Sea. This was not something they fought for, but was given to them by Xianyuan. Is there a mistake in my understanding of this part of history? If there is no mistake, they should not have used this method to interfere in the Battle of Jima Peninsula. If they only wanted to preserve their ancestral land, they could have told Xianyuan directly that they did not want to cultivate their power and only maintain their old home. What's wrong with that? A sect with such a background actually dared to attack my Xuanyuan's disciples in the Battle of the Peninsula. I don't care if it was his personal decision or the sect decision. I will not tolerate it. I would rather give Jima Peninsula to the Jiwen Temple than the Narcissus sect, because they're not mature enough. Perfected Nan was very interested. This cigarette, but was more interesting than he had imagined. He was not a lunatic who only knew how to kill and cultivate. He had studied the path of growth of the ancestral masters, and finally found that they always had their own unique way of thinking. He believed that this was the most important factor in their success, especially one of the great sword deities. Therefore, he continued to ask, because in this kind of question and answer, he could vaguely trace the way this disciple thought. Your understanding of that part of history is still a little off. You can take some time to look at it in your free time, but the general direction is not bad. Then, why would you rather the Jiwen Temple? Why not the Lone Mountain sect? Isn't a body cultivator easier to master than a spell cultivator? Lu Xiaoyi pouted. It was the first time they met, so it was not good for him to say too much. It would make people think that he was not shrewd and too frivolous. Nanjinren could tell what he was thinking. You don't have to worry. What we say today will not be passed to a third person's ears. I also want to know what the middle-level cultivators of the Fifth Ring thought of Qin Kong, even if it might be one-sided, and Xianyuan goes against one's words. This will help me understand you, and how I will use you in the future. Was he going to be a hired thug and run around the province every day? Or was it because he had his own time to be independent and free as a leader? I'm busy, and you're probably busy too, so we probably don't have much time to get to know each other. So make a choice right now. In front of this shrewd elder, Lu Xiaoyi could not resist the temptation of freedom. To have my own time, and to have independent to himself, to myself, martial uncle. This is not the case in the Five Rings. Only mediocre people have freedom, and those who are slightly outstanding will be treated like donkeys. Perfected Nan smiled. This is the blue sky mountain, not the dome of the Five Rings. There is no such thing as subordinates. If you really want to talk about tradition, the tradition of the Shao Mountain is the authentic sword vein. As for the dome, it has already changed. Of course, in that kind of environment, it has to change. But there is one thing. The sword chi of the Shao Mountain sect will not be obedient. We first follow the tradition, then consider the opinions of the Five Rings. So, you have a chance to show yourself and fight for your future mission in the Shao Mountain. Lu Xiaoyi had to admit that in front of an old man like Perfected Nan, he was an insensible child. Just one sentence from him made him want to take out all his treasures. But it didn't matter. In front of the elders of the sect, there was no need to hide anything, so why bother? He was worried that they would talk too much. But if he looked at it from a different angle and only treated this old Taoist as an elder, he had to know his place. Even if he came back from the Five Rings, he was just a Jin Dan, not much better than others. Martial uncle, according to the judgment of the sect, the three pure ones are behind the knowledge clock temple, and the Lone Mountain sect has the path of Buddhism. In the battle, I found that the Lone Mountain sect skills indeed have the shadow of Buddhism. So I believe that all these guesses are true. If I have to choose between the three pure ones and the filthy Buddhism, I'd rather choose the three pure ones. Because the three pure ones are easy to deal with, our Xianyuan has maintained a psychological advantage over the three pure ones for tens of thousands of years. Perfected Nan was very curious. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. No, the three pure ones are not easy to deal with. Even more difficult than Buddhism. But at least we know where their bottom line is. They also know where our taboos are, so we can control them. But Buddhism is different. We don't know what they will do. What will they do? Where are their limits? I'd rather deal with the three pure ones, who are powerful but know their limits, than with a seemingly ordinary Buddhism that hides everything behind a veil of mystery. Because they can't be controlled. Perfected Nan was non-committal, but you chose the sea beast of the South Sea in the end. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Who asked them to be there at the right time? Since they were instigated to get involved in this muddy water, don't blame Xin Yuan for roasting them on the fire. It's much easier than dealing with the 3 pure ones. Perfected Nan laughed, took a pot of wine, and poured 2 cups. I was also called Perfected Wine in Shao Mountain. When I'm old, I like to drink a mouthful. I can't change it. As for your tasks, I'll be in charge, and other trivial matters will be taken care of by others. This old man won't beat around the bush with you. I'll let people do things based on their ability. The better you do, the easier I'll make it for you. If you procrastinate and don't understand the big picture, I'll turn you back into a busy thug. You don't need me to teach you the difference, do you? Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Make the best use of people and things. If I don't live up to expectations, then I deserve to be a thug. I can't blame others. Perfected Nan took a sip and said sadly, in the cultivation world, there are different ways to understand cultivation. In Xinyuan Sword School, there are different ways to understand cultivation. For example, the Dome School focuses on achieving breakthroughs in actual combat. I'm not saying that this method is bad, but no matter how brave and fearless a swordsman is, there will be a limit. The sword vein is also a branch of Taoism. As for cultivation, I always think that it's appropriate to be active and passive. If you're too relaxed, you'll lose the sharpness of the sword vein. If you're too iron-blooded, you'll lose the true meaning of Taoism. It's hard to grasp the propriety, and it depends on yourself. As far as I'm concerned, although the 5-ring sword vein is flourishing, there haven't been any outstanding figures in the past 10,000 years. This might be related to this. Some people say that this is because luck has run out and the wheel of fortune has turned, but I don't think so. The 5 rings cultivation environment is too radical, and it's lost the most important direction of cultivation, longevity. All right, I'll stop complaining. For you, cultivation is the foundation, and you can't forget it. Chapter 578. Lu Xiaoyi didn't think it was a complaint. Being relaxed had its own profound concept of cultivation. To put it simply, the Nanjunren believed that the 5th ring sect's way of cultivating talents could produce very qualified swordsman talents below the monarch level. They would have strong fighting strength and could stand on their own wherever they went. But at a higher level, they would lose the possibility to reach a higher level. That was the level of Tao. It wasn't something that could be truly understood by fighting and killing all day long. Tao needed to be cultivated. How to cultivate? Eat, sleep, drink, grow flowers, and be idle. Travel and do nothing. In fact, at the beginning of cultivation in the universe, cultivators were in such a state. Could you say that they were weak? Many of these people now had their own place in the immortal world. It couldn't be said that the way of cultivation of the swordsman in the 5th ring sect was wrong. It also couldn't be said that the way of cultivation of Mount E was conservative. The key was balance. The Nanjunren's seemingly casual complaint hit the weak spot of every cultivator who came back from the 5th ring sect. They all had the same problem. They lived too tirelessly and lived too nervously. Instead, they lost the true meaning of Tao. Lu Xiaoyi also had the same problem. It was just that he didn't realize it. This was because he was limited by his realm. He still had a vague idea of the future and couldn't see it clearly. He only had a rough guess. But the Nanjunren's words made him completely understand. Yes, when he first came to Xinyuan, he lived a cautious life. He was ignorant and didn't know how to improve himself. This was an overly relaxed attitude, which was not good. After 5 years in the Wolf Ridge, he had a sense of responsibility and urgency in his heart. He immediately changed his attitude and forced himself to be like a spinning top. He couldn't hold on for long either. Overall, he lacked a kind of balance, a kind of rhythm that could allow him to perfectly balance between relaxation and nervousness. He could accumulate strength and power in relaxation and quickly get rid of the tense state after a battle. Only in this way could he go further in his cultivation and be more efficient. It was more in line with the essence of cultivation. This was what the Nanjinren emphasized. It was very reasonable. His new abode was on the hidden sword peak. It was very magnanimous and imposing. There was nothing he could do about it. This was the specific situation of Mount E. The land was vast, but the population was sparse. He could choose any abode he wanted. According to Gu Ting, his abode was originally the abode of a famous Taoist. Ever since he went to the fifth ring, he never came back. Later, he died in a foreign land, and the abode became empty. It had been unused for thousands of years. With the current situation of Mount Shao, every Jindan cultivator had an immortal's cave like this without any pressure. Outside the door, one would be able to see the scenery. Looking from a high vantage point, one would be able to see most of the peaks of Mount Shao. It was a first-class house with a mountain view. The daily utensils in the cave residence were all newly purchased, not prepared by Gu Ting. After all, he was a Jindan, so he didn't need to fawn over Gu Ting like this. These were all arranged by the guy called Ice Guest, a little Zhuji stage cultivator he met in the South Sea. In Mount Shao, this kind of service work could be done without reaching the Zhuji stage. There would be strong men waiting for them. Whether they needed it or not, Lu Xiaoyi only needed to say a word. However, this Ice Guest was very attentive. He was very thorough in his work. He arranged everything properly, no matter how big or small. Although he didn't say a word and left after arranging everything, and didn't stay for long to make others feel disgusted, Lu Xiaoyi, who was sharp, still guessed his thoughts at the first moment. Did he want to be apprenticed to another master? With his sensible appearance, it was no wonder that other people were still single. However, he had two masters, one before and one after the other. Lu Xiaoyi had never thought of accepting an apprentice. There were many reasons. It wasn't that he was afraid that this guy would bring bad luck to his masters, but that he himself hadn't settled down yet. How would he have the leisure to cultivate a disciple? These days, he was not in a hurry to practice. Instead, he stayed in the peaks of Mount Shao every day. In the beautiful scenery of the snowy mountains, he gradually calmed down his increasingly anxious mood since he reached the bearing essence stage. He told himself that there was nothing to be anxious about. He had just started. He still had 400 to 500 years to squander in the bearing essence stage. He could totally use the method that was suitable for him to practice. He didn't have to live a nervous life like he did in the 5 rings. Although it was very fulfilling, it was easy to explode if it was too full. Except for the heaven's will in the morning and evening, the daily swinging of the sword, and the breakthrough of the sword spirit, he rarely practiced swordsmanship or other supplementary skills. Instead, he spent most of his time wandering around and studying the history of Mount Shao. He was suddenly fascinated by history, because to understand Mount Shao, one must know its past. This place was called the Holy Land of the Sword Vein. What made it so unique? Was it the people here, or the scenery here? He vaguely felt that if he could understand Mount Shao one day, it would be of great benefit to his practice. Mount Shao was very quiet, which was completely different from a dome. There were 2 different styles. Lu Xiaoyi felt that he could adapt to both. Sometimes he wondered if he would have taken a different path if he had been taken to Qing Kong instead of the dome. There was no difference between good and bad. He could only say that he was lucky. When he needed an intense environment, he was lucky enough to land in the 5 rings. When he needed peace, he came to Qing Kong. But it was more likely that he had the ability to adjust his mentality according to the environment. In any kind of environment, he could find the most suitable thing for himself. There are very few perfected masters here. There are many reasons. Perfected masters are very busy, and there are very few perfected masters. Most importantly, this is not the place to cultivate Jindan. Lu Xiaoyi sometimes came to chat with Gu Ting. He was on duty at Soaring Heaven Pavilion, so he had more time. Therefore, Lu Xiaoyi asked this question. He had been on Mount Shao for a month, but he had not heard of any perfected master giving a lecture. This was impossible in the dome. Lu Xiaoyi understood what Gu Ting meant. Some of the Jindan who stayed here came back from the 5 rings. Just like the 6 senior brothers who came back with him, they could not even form their nascent souls in the 5 rings, let alone return to Qin Kong. There were also some who formed their golden cores in Qin Kong. Among these people, the ambitious ones took the initiative to ask to go to the 5 rings. The ones who stayed behind were the main force trying to break through to the upper realm. Because there were few people, most of them had a master or a more fixed teacher. However, they would not give a public lecture. There were very few people who listened. In fact, not every perfected master was good at giving lectures. There were many people who had knowledge but could not express it. Education also required talent. Some people were suitable for teaching and educating others, while others were suitable for exploring alone. It was not absolute. For example, Liu Xiaoyi could say some nonsense, but it would be difficult for him to teach Foundation establishment how to cultivate. But if you really want to learn something, and by that, I mean the kind of inexplicable, crazy, or even nonsense, you might as well go to the old man's peak to take a look. There are crouching tigers and hidden dragons there. Of course, I'm talking about their past. There are always some strange ideas that are very interesting. Chapter 579. It wasn't that Liu Xiaoyi couldn't find someone to teach. In Xianyuan, if you made a request, they would definitely arrange it for you. However, the problem was that he didn't know which enlightened master had a similar path as him, so he couldn't be careless about it. In Jindan, they weren't primary school students who had to learn according to the teacher's instructions. Instead, everyone had their own direction and specialties. If you didn't match the teacher, how could you teach them? In this aspect, the Dome of the 5 Rings was the most familiar. Cultivators focused on self-study, and then they could choose from different enlightened masters to achieve the best learning results. However, this was based on the fact that there were many enlightened masters in the 5 Rings. The Soaring Heaven Pavilion had enough people to arrange enlightened masters in different directions. They covered almost every aspect of the swordsman, saving time for both sides. However, it couldn't be done here. He didn't deliberately want to obtain anything from Zhonglao Peak, but to a group of old people who had struggled their whole lives on the path of Tao, it was necessary to show proper respect. In any case, he was very relaxed right now and had time to arrange his own pace of life. Stepping onto Zhonglao Peak to show respect, he didn't choose to fly. Instead, he climbed a mountain with his feet on the ground. The scenery of Zhonglao Peak was very ordinary among the 13 peaks of Shao Mountain. All of its characteristics could be described with one word: ordinary. However, it was precisely this kind of ordinariness that suited the mood of the old people. Most of the old people who lived on Zhonglao Peak were Yuanying, and very few were Jindan. Although Zhonglao Peak didn't have such a rule that one had to be at a certain realm to enter, when most of the people were Jindan, an old man of Yuanying would feel embarrassed to enter. For Jindan cultivators, their age was limited after all. Most of the mortal families were under their care, so returning to their families was the choice of many people. Even if they didn't have a family, it was still possible to establish one themselves. Nascent soul stage cultivators were different. They had a lifespan of thousands of years and could easily wander the universe for hundreds of years. This made it difficult for them to take care of their family. In addition, it was difficult for nascent soul stage cultivators to have children. They had a thorough understanding of the essence of life, so basically no one returned to the mortal world. They would rather spend their last moments in the sect. In the eyes of mortals, there was no such thing as old cultivators. They would either roam the world unhindered, or they would die and reincarnate. But in reality, cultivators would also grow old. The aging of a Foundation establishment cultivator would occur at the end of their life due to the loss of their magic power. This process would be very fast, which was often seen in the eyes of mortals. Perhaps they could still fly in the sky today, but the next day they would die. This was because their bodies could not withstand the pressure of losing their magic power. Jindan was in a better situation. When their mana and spirit started to decline towards the end of their lives, due to the base of their mana and the solid foundation of their bodies, they often still had more than 10 years left. This was enough time for them to arrange their own affairs and even have the ability to establish a family in the mortal world. When it came to yuaniing, this process became even longer. This was the dividing line for high-level cultivators. The weakening of their mana and spirit had a slow process of decline, and the toughness of their bodies was completely incomparable to that of low-level cultivators. Therefore, they could often persist for more than 10 years, and even live for more than 100 years. During this period, their combat ability would become weaker and weaker with the passing of time. The upper realm was like the moon in the water, ethereal and unattainable. The only thing they could do was to grow flowers and grass, cultivate their body and mind, and in the final stage, understand the meaning of life. The natural death of a true monarch would be even longer. Those who already had a deeper understanding of the realm of Tao would often choose to exile themselves to the universe, drifting in the void or on some desolate planet to end their lives. This was the natural death of cultivators at different realms. Everyone was different and could not be lumped together. In this place, when facing these old men and women, one did not dare to use one's divine sense to sweep around. One could only walk with one's tail between one's legs and one's head shrunk. This was because the old men here did not turn bad because they were old, but because the bad guys turned old. As they walked past a gentle slope, a loud voice shouted, "Stop! Brat, you stepped on my vase." Lu Xiaoyi's heart trembled. This was a natural gentle slope, and there were no traces of sowing. It was probably a vase flower, and he stepped on its seed. He hurriedly took a step to the side, and the voice sounded again. I stepped on another one. Helpless, he could only float up. The voice was still unforgiving. You're blocking the sunlight. How difficult to serve. Lu Xiaoyi did not lose his temper and followed the voice to apologize. I'm sorry. I don't know farming, and I've spoiled senior's sowing. An old man dressed like an old farmer came out from the forest next to him. He was barefoot and wore a cloth coat, and in his hand there was a black lump that emitted a foul smell. It was unknown what it was. He glared at him and said, Brat, what are you doing here instead of doing what you youngsters should do? The atmosphere here is gloomy, and the sun is no longer shining. This is not a place you should be. Lu Xiaoyi bowed to the old man properly and did not hide anything. These old yuaniing who were on the verge of death might not be at the peak of their magic power and spirit, but their vision, knowledge, and experience were all better than his by a few hundred streets. Exaggerating here would only leave a bad impression, and there would be nothing else. Brat, cigarette butt from the fifth ring. I've just entered Shao Mountain, and I'm very curious. I've heard that there are wise people gathered at Elder Peak, and I yearn for it. There's no one to preach on Shao Mountain, so I came here to see if I could try my luck and get some wonderful words to dispel the doubts in my heart. The old man waved his hand. There's no wonderful words. There's no profound meaning. If there was, we wouldn't waste our lives here, eating and waiting for death. Although there aren't many preachers on Shao Mountain, there are other ways. With the Rising Heaven Pavilion's arrangement, there will be a Taoist to dispel your doubts. Brat, you come to the wrong place. However, Lu Xiaoyi refused. There's no profound meaning, but it's good to have agricultural skills. I've been nervous passing my fifth ring, so of course I have to learn how to cultivate my body and mind here. If Senior has no interest, this brat can go elsewhere. If you need help, this brat can also do something. The old man was disdainful. There were many gold core cultivators who came to the old man peak to seek guidance and fated chances like this. Almost every gold core cultivator on Mount Shao had done this before, but who could actually obtain anything? The swordsman's Tao was hard work, research, and talent. Relying on others' guidance to soar to the heavens was a wrong attitude in itself. Those Jin Dan came here for 10 days to half a month at the shortest and a year or several years at the longest. In the end, they all knew that their efforts were useless and retreated in the face of difficulties. Who actually obtained anything? The Tao of these old men who were on the verge of death was not the Tao of young people. It was too gloomy, and they had entered the Tao too deeply. It was not something that cultivators at the level of Jin Dan could understand, and it was easy for them to deviate from the correct path. Thus, on Elder Peak, no one would truly guide these Gene Dan. Chapter 580. Just as he was about to open his mouth to chase him away, he looked at his barren flower field and the slightly thin flower seedlings and changed his mind. I don't need you for watering and fertilizing. I can still move. However, I do lack some fertilizer here. You stepped on my seeds, so it's not too much to leave something behind, right? Such a request was really... Where is it? To be honest, this request was not a big deal. Lu Xiaoyi was not a clean freak. Behind a forest. Find a new pit. I'm old, and my internal organs are limited. I can't produce too much. I'm not as good as you young people. After Lu Xiaoyi turned to the forest, there were indeed more than 10 shallow pits lined up in a row. They were probably used for composting according to the time. The fermentation rate was different, and there were all kinds of smells mixed together. Some of them were already filled, and some were still empty. These were the new pits that the old man had mentioned. Lu Xiaoyi found a new pit at the edge. Just as he was about to squat down, the old man's voice rang out. Pull next to each other. This way, it's easier to determine the time of composting. It's against the rules if you hide so far away. In front of Yuan Ying, there was no hidden agenda. Even if they were now in a declining period, Lu Xiaoyi did not complain. He changed to another pit and squatted down, using all his strength. He had not eaten much recently, so there was no way to make something out of nothing. Therefore, the quantity was a little low. After composting, he pulled up his pants and walked out of the forest. The old man was beaming with joy. Good, good, good. Young man, you're not bad. You're welcome to come again next time. We don't know each other anything now. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and nodded. It was his first time coming into contact with them, so there was no need to pester them. These old men had strange tempers and were hard to understand. I may come again to disturb Senior in the future. Senior, please don't find me troublesome. He walked over the gentle slope, and the old man's voice came from behind him. Next time, remember to eat more before you come, especially big fish and meat. You're so young, and yet you've only contributed so much. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and smiled bitterly. He didn't expect that his first contact with these old guys would be a bridge built with feces. The world was strange and funny. Most of the people on Zhonglao Peak had a weird temper like the old man who grew flowers. He didn't care. If they were willing to talk to him, he would talk to them. If they were impatient, he would leave on his own. There was nothing to complain about. When he was in this state, he might not be much better than them. In this way, he had gotten to know these old fellows. The main reason was through Old Man Huang, the old man who forced him to grow fat. They couldn't be considered friends despite the difference in age, nor could they be considered old friends at first sight. They just didn't dislike each other, that was all. They were all human sperm. How could it be so easy for others to dig out their hearts? Besides, if he really took it out, would you be able to catch it? Lu Xiaoyi never opened his mouth to ask anything. He didn't expect this. The most important reason he came here was to feel their attitude towards life. They were leisurely, detached, and faintly insistent. He didn't come here every day, but every few days. First, he came to Old Man Huang's place to leave the fertilizer. Then, he went to Fatty Chin's place to see his sculpture. Then, he went around the mountainside to listen to a few old men reciting poems. Then, he climbed up to admire Granny Hua's embroidery, and so on. This process was actually a process of calming his heart. A cultivator calming his heart wasn't just sitting cross-legged and closing his eyes to concentrate. That was a shallow level of meditation. It only meant that he could practice martial arts. True tranquility was a kind of attitude deep in one's soul. Through a pair of calm eyes, one could clearly see the more fundamental things of the cultivation world. This was not something that could be accomplished overnight. It required time and also this kind of sensibility. Zhenrenan did what he said. He didn't bother him with those trivial matters. In this year, he could live according to his own cultivation rhythm. This made him very satisfied. When his state of mind finally settled down, a new task came. You go to the East Sea to pick up a group of people. Here is their detailed information. Familiarize yourself with it and set off as soon as possible. Lu Xiaoyi took the jade slip from Junran. After scanning it with his divine sense, he already knew the general situation. This was a family, the family of the East Sea. Their ancestors were also glorious. 20,000 years ago, they were one of the 17 top sects of the blue sky big world. It was a big sect that focused on alchemy. However, in the historical changes of the blue sky cultivation world, this kind of sect that had a foothold in alchemy, but didn't have the ability to fight gradually declined like most sections. Especially in the thousands of years when the blue sky spiritual opportunity collapsed, they suffered a heavy blow. The spiritual plants, spiritual grass, and spiritual beasts disappeared, and the basic materials for alchemy were gone. Orthodoxies like Jinren Nan found it difficult to establish themselves in the cultivation world. Therefore, there was a split. Some families went to the fifth ring to seek refuge, and some stayed in the blue sky big world. When the spiritual opportunity recovered, the power had already collapsed and couldn't return to its heyday. For sects like theirs, their disciples were still very popular. After all, every force needed some alchemists, and they were talents that all forces fought over. Xinyuan had also made a move before, but the disciples of this orthodoxy seemed to be more accepting of the law branch's olive branch, and kept a respectful distance from the sword branch. One of the families was the family that carried the tripod of Junran. It was called the family. However, it stayed in the East Sea and struggled to survive, trying to recreate its past glory. Their ambition was good, but their strength was lacking. After thousands of years, they experienced a lot of ups and downs. Even if they wanted to revive, they were powerless. Once the trend in the cultivation world was formed, it was very difficult to change. It wasn't something that could be done with hard work, not to mention that they didn't have enough strength. Is this related to Xianyuan? Nan Jinren nodded. She's the wife of an earth-shaking figure in Xianyuan. Tens of thousands of years ago, they had a good relationship with Xianyuan. At that time, we relied on them for a lot of medicinal pills. Ever since the clear sky spiritual opportunity was restored, we returned the old land of the Eastern Sea's reverence yellow true sect to them. We even chased away the overlord of the Eastern Sea, the Jade Clear sect, just to give them a safe space to develop. It's a pity that mud can't support a wall. They can't defend their business, and they can't even start a business. If it weren't for my Xuanyuan's secret support, even the revered Yellow Sect's old nest, the Thousand G Valley, would have been taken away long ago. But he had bitterly held on until now, and it was difficult to continue. The clan has failed to live up to our expectations, and our Mount E is also in an awkward situation right now. It's not good to expand our business too much. Even the northern region is somewhat powerless to defend, and vile people are spying on us, not to mention the clan, who is far away in the Eastern Sea. This time, it's the clan who took the initiative to send a letter asking for the northern region's protection. They no longer insist on their dream of reviving Mount E, which they have persisted for tens of thousands of years. I'm sending you to bring them back as safely as possible. This is a matter of the domain, and it's not good for Yuanying to intervene. There's a force that can stop them? Lu Xiaoyi was very sensitive. Nan Jinren sighed. For an orthodoxy like the revered Yellow True sect, the most valuable thing is these cultivators who know how to refine pills. The rest is not worth mentioning. If they want to close their business, of course, it will attract countless spying eyes. Who doesn't want to have a few more mature pill refiners in their own sect? Those are all piled up with resources, so how can they leave so easily? Of course, it's difficult. If it's not difficult, why would I send you? Just send someone. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.